cosmology, God, are even rarer.
Yeah.
And so for this reason, I thought, this is fun. When the late Christopher Hitchens was alive, I did a bunch of these debates, mainly on campus. And I haven't done one in a lot of years. I've been focused on the political.
He died, unfortunately.
Well, yeah, it was unfortunate because he and I got along well. We'd in fact often sit after the debate and put down a bottle or two of wine, and then he'd tell me gossip about the Clintons. And
that's one thing Dinesh would love, any kind of gossip about the Clintons.
About the time that the mullahs chased him down the street in Iran and things like that. So we actually had some.
Oh, we're having a good old time now.
So it was interesting.
Good old time.
It's one of the things that I noted, because while Hitch and I only met briefly, we have a bunch of mutual friends, and there were political areas where I disagreed with him. But I've spent most of my time. I spent a good chunk of time, like I was as a Rushland Didaheda, and then I was kind of apolitical, and of course now it seems that everybody is more political, and a lot of people will say, "Oh, well, in the olden days it was we shouldn't discuss religion and politics," and I'm like, those are the things that matter most, and the things that I'm most interested in discussing. Although I tend to lean more on the religion front, because I was a Southern Baptist. You, I believe, if I'm correct, were Catholic but are non-denominational Christian now. I mean.
Yeah, I was raised in India. My family, going generations back, was converted by Portuguese missionaries and to Catholicism. That's kind of how I got the Portuguese last name, de Souza, which my parents then married to an Indian first name. But we were just, it was a social Christianity rather than a devout Christianity. And then when I came to America, obviously largely a more Protestant country, I began to think about these things a little different. And so I would say I actually adopted my faith more in adult life than I did as a kid when I was a believer, but in a very routinized Sunday Mass kind of way.
So the title of this event, when it was being promoted and everything, is God, Trump, and the Future of America. So, I mean,
Trump would probably like to switch the order of those.
Yes.
But nevertheless.
I would like to remove one of them.
I thought, God, I know. Trump too?
No, remove one from the discussion. The other one, I don't need to remove because I don't have any reason to think he exists, but the discussion is good.
Well, don't you make your life talking about him?
I do spend a lot of time talking about him.
It would be like if I've spent my life talking about unicorns.
It would be, except that you don't live in a world where the overwhelming majority of people believe in unicorns and are trying to legislate what other people can do based on what they think unicorns want.
Okay, this is how they get started here. Let me just run to the chat quickly. I've seen a few familiar names in the chat. Zents29, welcome back. MBL McKenzie already said hi. For those of you who are new, nice to see some new faces. Harry Dunn. Brexit Britain. But that logo looks familiar. Brexit Britain says, Pang Boy, I'm Britbong. Oh, new year, new name. How's it going, bud? Welcome back. Let's see, Stuart MC says, welcome back, Stuart, says, I live in Mount Lake Terrace. I'm not a WA native, but I've lived in Seattle for 10 years. Well, welcome. Dominic Holden, welcome to the live stream. Dude, I love that you are waging an ideological war against Benny, especially on that subject. My sentiment, you've won before the gates even open. Well, he hasn't even showed up to the battlefield yet, so we'll see. Let's see, what else we got here? Harry Dunn says, I think he's talking about Dinesh, looks like a wombat. Aw, that's mean. But wombats are cute, so maybe it's not too mean. Shalom, sup, welcome. Okay, let's keep going here.
Sachik, what is, since we're into it,
this is how it goes.
Yeah. What is a specific, concrete example of someone trying to do that? Well, somebody who says, God told me X, and I want you, Matt, therefore, to do Y.
Oh,
who says that? Who takes that position that you're spending your life fighting?
Sure. So, are we in any way suggesting that there's not a particularly loud and well-financed fundamentalist religious right who are stacking the courts in accordance with their ideology, which is influenced by their religious things? I have family members who are primarily single-issue voters. Like, if there's two candidates and one is set out to end abortion and the other one's not, that's the only thing that matters to them.
I just got to recognize Ericard, the Immortal, is back with the super chat. Thank you so much for the super chat. Ericard, the Immortal, is back with Trump 2020 for the win, gents. Welcome back, the Immortal.
So I think it puts people in a position where they're probably voting against their own best interests.
Can you name, just pursuing this to see what we're talking about, can you name a single Supreme Court justice who, in your opinion, does not arrive at their judgments for any constitutional or jurisprudential or moral or philosophical reason, but simply consults a divine oracle in order to make a ruling? Can you name one of them?
Oh, no. I'm not in any way suggesting people don't genuinely have these beliefs. It's just that if people's views, like people within all of them, whether they're Supreme Court justices or not, they're going to have particular views on how the way the world's going to work. You and I are. And
sure,
there are people, I have no idea if you're one of them, there are people whose view on how the world should work everything should be working in accordance with my understanding of this deity.
Well, let's take an example, because I think the discussion can become kind of airy if we don't pin it down.
Okay,
let's talk about abortion.
Sure.
Okay. Did you know, for example, that Christopher Hitchens was pro-life?
I know, for example.
We have a voicemail number. The number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's an interesting question about the Joe Biden Democratic presidential nomination. Take a listen.
Hey, David Packman, this is Todd from Pennsylvania. Question about what's going to happen if Joe Biden sweeps the nomination on Tuesday night. I haven't watched anything. It's really early in the morning of Wednesday, and I haven't got to news. But if he does take the nomination tonight, and then tomorrow he forgets his name, where do we go from there?
Yeah. So listen, this is more of the Biden dementia stuff. So I'm going to be careful here. We've covered Biden's gaffe. Joe Biden there's a bunch of different things going on. Number one, Joe Biden has been gaffe-prone for 30 years. That's one thing. Number two, Joe Biden has a stutter. That's the second thing. Number three, Joe Biden's close to 80 years old, and he certainly has slowed down as, at a mathematical and statistical level, almost anyone who is Joe Biden's age would be experiencing. There are some bad faith actors, including cynics on the right, who have ignored Donald Trump's obvious cognitive decline over the last many years, who are now just so chaos talking about Biden dementia. I'm going to keep talking about what's going on with Joe Biden, but people who are equating with some of the Biden slurred, clearly he is completely demented and has no idea what's going on around him. There are some really bad faith actors that are now pushing this. There are people on the left, Bernie or Busters, who are pushing it because they think it'll get Bernie to be the nominee. It won't. Bernie lost. There are people on the right who are pushing it because they want to just cause chaos. They want to very cynically ignore Donald Trump's obvious cognitive decline by pointing out these videos of Joe Biden. We're going to be covering this seriously. I'm not going to be ignoring it. But again, people who are waiting for something like Joe Biden forgets his name, first of all, I think you're going to have to wait a while for that to happen. I don't think Joe Biden's going to be forgetting his name anytime soon. And understand the sources of where a lot of this stuff is happening. You are seeing both Bernie bros and Trumpists share the same Biden videos for different reasons. And I think we want to be very, very careful about simply saying, well, Joe Biden's demented, and that's all there is to it. And there's a lot of good information about this online, which maybe we'll have time to dig into tomorrow. We have a great bonus show for you today. I am out of time, but it is a good one. I hope you'll join me at joinpacman.com on today's bonus show. What if you could read 10 books in just one sitting? That's exactly what one of my favorite apps lets you do. It's called Blinkist, and what they do is take thousands of popular nonfiction books, they condense them down into text or audio that you can consume in 15 minutes. Blinkist makes sure that you're getting all of the important core insights from each book. So it's perfect for exploring a book you otherwise wouldn't have time for. It's a full book you're thinking about buying. You can use Blinkist to sample first. Just think how much you can enrich yourself by being able to soak up an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. I recently checked out the book Podcast Marketing Strategy by Daniel Rolls and Kieran Rogers, and so useful, so particularly applicable to what I'm doing. Really recommend it. Blinkist has books on politics, philosophy, science. They have 27 different nonfiction categories, and a subscription is only about $8 a month, and you get the entire library. But you can try it totally free and get 25% off a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/Packman. I've put the link right underneath this video. Let's get to audience questions for the week, one that in many forms has been on.
Imagine yourself in a new RAV4, Camry, or Tacoma.
Sweet.
Get ready to turn your dreams into reality.
Right now, save big with an incredible deal on the Toyota of your dreams.
All right, people, we are back. Back in the saddle. I just subjected myself to watching the, I guess you'd call it, exit interview that Liz Warren sat for with Rachel Maddow, of course. And they discussed the end of her campaign. So there were a couple things that came up. Number one, Warren had almost entirely favorable things to say about Joe Biden. Interesting. But she was most passionate when discussing the issue of Bernie supporters online doing things that are alleged to be very mean. Rachel Maddow actually asked her directly about the issue of snake emojis being tweeted. That's what Rachel Maddow felt was the most pressing issue to bring up with Elizabeth Warren on the day that she suspends the campaign. So just to use the online cliche, let that sink in. I also thought it was hilarious that, when they spent a couple, 5 or 10 minutes talking about sexism, Rachel Maddow actually exhibited some self-awareness in admitting that she, Rachel, was the target demographic for Warren, because Rachel Maddow is a middle-aged woman with an advanced degree in New England, and that's the sweet spot for Elizabeth Warren. So Rachel Maddow relayed to her, in Warren, that she had spoken to many people over the course of today, friends, colleagues, etc., who are, in Rachel's words, bereft, and they can't get up from the couch because they're just so despondent at the exit. All right, people, we are back in the saddle. I just subjected myself to watching the, I guess you'd call it, exit interview that Liz Warren sat for with Rachel Maddow, of course. And they discussed the end of her campaign. So there were a couple things that came up. Number one, Warren had almost entirely favorable things to say about Joe Biden. Interesting. But she was most passionate
when discussing the issue of Bernie supporters online doing things that are alleged to be very mean. Rachel Maddow actually asked her directly about the issue of snake emojis being tweeted. That's what Rachel Maddow felt was the most pressing issue to bring up with Elizabeth Warren on the day that she suspends her campaign. So just to use the online cliche, let that sink in. I also thought it was hilarious that, when they spent a couple, 5 or 10 minutes talking about sexism, Rachel Maddow actually exhibited some self-awareness in admitting that she, Rachel, was the target demographic for Warren. Because Rachel Maddow is a middle-aged woman with an advanced degree in New England. And, that's the sweet spot for Elizabeth Warren. So Rachel Maddow relayed to her, meaning Warren, that she had spoken to many people over the course of today, friends, colleagues, etc., who are, in Rachel's words, bereft, and they can't get up from the couch because they're just so despondent at the exit.
Hey, Michael Tracy. That's your name, right? Yeah, Michael Tracy. This is a message from Michael Tracy. And a question. What makes you liberal? And why are you? And are you going to vote for Trump? If not, why not? There, 2 questions. Please answer, please. That is all.
From the race of Elizabeth Warren. So that's interesting. But the conversation shifted to the subject of Bernie supporters online, and Elizabeth Warren was clearly affected by this. She claimed that Bernie supporters online made women of color fearful for their safety, and that something needs to be done to stop this, because all candidates, all political figures, I guess everyone, has a personal responsibility to manage and control their supporters online. So they're directly responsible for their supporters. Warren said this while she was still running. So she reiterated it here, and Warren pledged that she's going to come up with a plan, quote unquote, to rein in online so-called vitriol. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing about that plan. I'm sure there's going to be no First Amendment concerns associated with that plan. I'm sure it'll work perfectly in terms of gauging who is a supporter and who isn't. Like, how authoritarian and petty do you have to be to even theorize that a presidential candidate or campaign could have any oversight capabilities with respect to online supporters? It just makes no sense. I sometimes get criticized on Twitter for people who appear in my mentions or people who interact with me or retweet me, because the insinuation is, or sometimes the outright claim is, that I bear direct personal responsibility for those who interact with me on Twitter. And I've always just fundamentally rejected the logic of that, because it's beyond fallacious, and it's actually damaging and insane to bully and pressure people into somehow accepting that they have any even just sheer ability to control who interacts with them on the internet. Like, how do you evaluate that? How do you possibly, in a logistical sense, manage that? It's just preposterous. But that's the subject that Elizabeth and Rachel decided to speak on at length tonight. In terms of the despondency of her supporters, it's been fairly amusing today to watch the reactions. It's almost as if Elizabeth Warren died in a tragic accident rather than suspended her presidential campaign after a series of self-inflicted failures. Like, the commemorations and the remembrances being offered of her really sound like they're obituaries, like they're remembering somebody who died tragically. I mean, it's crazy how so many people seem to project their own personal psychodramas and individualized preoccupations onto Elizabeth Warren and then talk about her campaign and the meaning of her as a political figure as if they're in a therapy session. Like, this rhetoric of therapeutic like self-admission or tell-all has infected political discourse, especially online, to a degree that is truly disturbing. I saw a photo a little while ago of Elizabeth Warren's photo, kind of portrait in the Harvard Law faculty building, being surrounded by these kind of mournful Post-it notes. So they made a shrine to Elizabeth Warren in the Harvard Law faculty building. Again, as if she died. It's crazy. And then you look at some of these. So what the Warren campaign people did is that they all went on Twitter. And if you're not on Twitter, excuse me for discussing this, but it actually is relevant. Because the Warren campaign, and this is not just exclusive to the Warren campaign, but the Warren campaign had a whole army of Twitter staffers who they all have the same, color theme in their profiles. They put a lot of effort into homogenizing their Twitter presence. And they're all, mourning in public today. And you look at some of them, and it's just wow. Were you really at all doubtful that these people would fail to appeal to a mass electorate? I see these mournful tweets by people whose titles is stuff like Director of Latinx Engagement. Huh? Do people not understand that Latinx is not a term that is used by virtually anybody except white liberals and also a handful of Latino or Hispanic people that white liberals are friends with? These are professional activist terms. And that's how the Warren campaign seemed to do their outreach amongst marginalized communities by hiring a bunch of precariously employed liberal arts graduates who are professional activists and advocacy people in their 20s and 30s. They were all hired onto the campaign, and they were paid to have discussions with other activists who, and then record those conversations and then write memos to Elizabeth Warren and have her, hold meetings with some of these professional activists, and that's the scope. That's the scope of the outreach, and that's why Warren gets lauded as listening to marginalized communities. All this weird rhetoric and this vocabulary that is totally inscrutable to the broad mass of voters, including minority voters. It's a rhetoric that makes the professional progressive activists feel good about themselves. but it's wholly unrelatable to virtually anybody else. Like, I saw this like Warren account, which has a relationship with the campaign, and I'm not trying to be mean here, although I guess I am in a way because it's fun to mock. But this account associated with that campaign is called Black WomXN for Warren. So they spell women WOMXN. Huh? How many black women in the United States does the Warren campaign and the Warren surrogates and operatives refer to themselves as Black WomXN? I'm not kidding. It's WOMXN. I don't even know exactly what that's supposed to connote. I guess it's like a gender-neutral term for women. So it would include women who are trans and that sort of thing. Okay. I know Warren has, her campaign has seeded a lot of news stories celebrating her for doing such tremendous outreach to trans women of color. And you know what? I'm shocked that black voters in North Carolina and Alabama didn't necessarily relate to that outreach strategy. I never would have guessed. You know what I think could have gotten Elizabeth Warren over the line? If she had announced ahead of time that she would pledge for her Secretary of Defense to be a black trans woman of color. Sorry. Oh, man. It's just like, this stuff is just unbelievable. Like, how do they think that this has any appeal whatsoever in the voters they're trying to court? Forget about the general election. Forget about the broad, the full scope of the national electorate. Even the Democratic primary electorate. This stuff appeals to like 3% of it. Like even most of the Warren people who supported her, I don't even think relate to this. It's a tiny, tiny subset of comically overeducated professional activists who live in their own little weird world and have no understanding at all of the voters that they're supposedly trying to appeal to. It's really embarrassing. I think the Warren campaign can be best understood as like a jobs program for underemployed 20 and 30-somethings who want to feel like they're fighting for progressive causes. And that's progressive with a capital P and a little trademark logo next to it. Because this stuff is so artificial, it's amazing. And I have no problem with being nice to trans people whenever you think about trans issues. But that's different from creating this pandering style of rhetoric which is so narrowly tailored that you're inevitably going to alienate countless others. Like, you don't have to be a rhetorical panderer in order to respect the rights and dignity of people. At least that's what I think. And you know what? Ironically, one of the reasons, not the reason, not the sole reason, but a reason that I would speculate for why Biden is winning is because I doubt his campaign was inundated or is inundated with these intersectional activists who are just a train wreck in terms of the drama they create, in terms of the parochial concerns that they have that they try to force on others, in terms of the sort of blinkered, myopic perspective that they have on politics and political organizing. Maybe Biden has some of that, but I don't think anywhere near to the extent that Warren in particular has, and frankly Bernie probably has to a degree as well, because if you're trying to hire professional progressive activists onto your campaign, a huge amount of them are going to be these types of people who have no idea what they're doing. Yeah, so, I could go on and on and on here. I'm going to do something more comprehensive about Super Tuesday once I've processed the full range of the data, which is still coming in, believe it or not. Of course, we don't have the full results from California yet, because it takes freaking forever. Let me just look up what the current results are. Yeah, so as of 7 o'clock tonight, which I guess was the last update, 93% in, and Bernie's margin of victory over Biden is 8.7%, which is not nearly enough for Bernie. And when I say that, I mean it's not enough to blunt the delegate lead that Biden is extremely likely to accrue elsewhere and did on Super Tuesday. So, and then you have a flood of endorsements coming in for Biden today. It's funny, every time you look at the endorsement tracker page on the 538 website, I just looked again right now. There's like 6 new endorsements from Biden for Biden from members of Congress, senators, governors, state officials, etc. So it's the Democratic machine is mobilizing around Biden in Michigan, and Michigan's the next primary next Tuesday, along with Missouri, Mississippi, and I think one or two others that I'm missing. But Michigan's. I don't want to be too defeatist, but if Bernie can't win Michigan, then it's hard to see where he beats Biden anywhere else. And the Democratic machinery is absolutely mobilizing behind Biden right now in the state. So, we'll have to see. I would love to ask some of these Biden endorsers who all of a sudden in the past couple of days have determined that he's the next great hope of the Democratic Party. I would ask them simply, do you believe that Joe Biden has his full cognitive capacities? Do you think that he is performing at a mentally optimal rate? Because anybody paying attention to Joe Biden knows that he's not. I don't know if he has dementia. I don't know what the issue is. It could just be simple age-related decline, which would not be unexpected for a man who is 77 years old and had a brain aneurysm in the 80s, right? But you can go back and watch Biden's debate performances and his speeches from 10, 20 years ago, and he's so much sharper, so much more lucid, so much better able to articulate coherent thoughts without rambling and misstating things. And this isn't just a matter of forgetting a word here or there or misspeaking as everybody does occasionally. It's a chronic inability to articulate complete sentences. And, while on paper I have long thought that Biden would be a stronger nominee in the general election than Hillary was, just because his baggage is not as profound, as many issues and liabilities as Biden does have. They don't rise to the level of Hillary. But, the big X factor, the big variable is Biden's cognition. And if every single day he's having obvious cognition failure, then, eventually I think people are going to notice. And it's not to say that Trump is the most lucid person in the world. He goes on crazy tirades at times that sound completely unhinged. And Trump, if you go back and look at his earlier interviews from decades ago, is obviously not as coherent as he once was either. But it's just not as blatant as is obviously the case with Biden. I mean, we're dealing with geriatrics here. I know life expectancy has gone up in the United States, but, the average lifespan for a male in the United States is 78.6 years old. Biden's going to be 78 by the general election, or he turned 78 in November. So, he's right on the edge there, and we're supposed to believe that he can deal with the rigors of a brutal campaign against Trump. We're supposed to believe he can manage the presidency. I mean, to say this is the elephant in the room is just a ridiculous understatement. So, if you live in Michigan or you live anywhere else, or you happen to come across one of these people who have been rallying around Biden with their endorsements lately, I'd love to hear you ask them what they make of Biden's cognition at the current moment, because it ain't pretty. And in terms of what Warren will do by way of an endorsement, in watching her Maddow interview tonight, I think she's going to bide her time for a while. I think Warren is somebody who has cognizance of her role within the system of the Democratic Party, and she wants to maximize her leverage within the party. That's why she was claiming anyway that she could be the unity candidate if it were to get to a second ballot at the convention, because she could unite, allegedly, the disparate factions within the party, between the moderates and the progressives, even though I don't even like those categorizations. They're incredibly reductive. But that was her theory of herself, and I think she's going to maintain that as this primary progresses, where she can sort of exert influence on both Bernie and Joe from afar. I find it a little hard to believe that she would endorse Bernie after watching her performance tonight, complaining about online Bernie Bro harassment. I feel like there are factions of the Warren support base that would find it grotesque if he were to endorse Bernie simply because of this online harassment stuff, as ridiculous as that sounds. But, this really actually does matter to people incredibly. And people who have social media influence, who exert outsized power over the nature of the discursive ecosystem within elite spheres. And the people who automatically think that Warren's whole support base would gravitate toward Bernie are, I think, deluding themselves. Think of who the Warren support base is. Many of them are recalcitrant Hillary 2016 supporters who passionately resent Bernie
Dear Mithridate.
for staying in the race as long as he did in 2016, which they think harmed Hillary for the general election, and I think that's true in a way. I think that did harm Hillary. But, who cares? She deserved it. But, they still have very vivid displeasure over Bernie's role in the 2016 election, and now they think that Bernie is responsible for taking out yet another accomplished woman in Elizabeth Warren. So to them, Bernie is like this big villain who hates women. Remember, that's the charge that Warren herself made against Bernie when she did her little sexism stunt on the debate stage before Iowa. So we'll see. To quote Donald Trump, we'll see what happens. Final note, I suppose, before I get to the super chats, is that you may have seen that Tulsi actually won an additional delegate from American Samoa. So she has 2 delegates, and that's 2 more delegates than Kamala Harris will ever have. Deal with it. Okay, my financial benefactor Sparky says, not that it was that hard, but Joe Biden obliterated Paul Ryan in the 2012 VP debate. He's definitely not the same. I totally agree with that. I've made that point multiple times. People who think that Joe Biden has always been sort of a blundering nitwit are wrong. I mean, he's done actually very well in the past in hyper-pressurized debate formats, such as with Paul Ryan that year. Andrew says, if Bernie fights, most interesting nomination cycle since the 70s. Potentially. I mean, I think it would have been, if you're talking about just what would be interesting, it would have been if multiple candidates stayed in the race and were accumulating significant numbers of delegates, because that would have made more likely an actual contested convention. But now that it's down to 2, effectively, I'm not erasing Tulsi, I'm just noting the fact that she only has 2 delegates right now. I don't think it'd be quite as interesting if there as the alternative. Zach says women is the champion of Gem XN and Latinx. This stuff is like unintelligible. Joe says he just gives some money and says #1 fan with the dancing pair. Thank you for that. Thoughts on Tulsi's Hindophobia tweet? I don't want to get into that subject now. It's just because I'm winding down here and there's just too much to say about it. Sorry. Okay, I'll say this. Tulsi's attitude toward India and Modi is that the United States ought not to interfere or intervene in the domestic affairs of India, just as they ought not to interfere or intervene in the domestic affairs of any other country. But India in particular, I think she feels strongly about because it's a massive democracy of 1.3 billion people on the other side of the world with extremely complex political dynamics that most Americans who scream about it on Twitter have no idea what they're talking about. I'm not comfortable making rash proclamations about the nature of Indian politics from my perch here in Jersey City, okay? I've never been to India. I don't speak any of the native languages in India except for English, which is fairly widely spoken, but I don't think that's sufficient to actually have a full understanding of India at all. And I'm intrinsically, reflexively skeptical of pundits who want to make it seem like they know what's going on in India when they barely have an understanding of what's going on in South Carolina. Like, these guys are oblivious, and so they're going to just claim that they have all the information. No, I have a little bit more humility than that. Okay? I think it's ridiculous that every time there's sectarian violence in India involving Hindus, that Tulsi is expected to do these kind of melodramatic denunciations as if her being a Hindu and her having met with Modi a couple times obliges her to be a key player in these debates. I don't accept that. And this idea that she's funded by Modi, supported by Modi, there's just no real evidence for that. Has she received financial support over the years from Indian Americans, some of whom are probably sympathetic to Modi? Yeah. Okay, but does that mean she's funded by Modi? What? That's what I have to say. Val0807 says, if candidate Bernie Sanders won't stand up to the DNC cheating and the Bernie Bros narrative, then how could a President Bernie Sanders stand up to a bought Senate? How could he be effective as president? Yeah, I mean, the weird thing is, I don't think Bernie's not like an internet native. I don't think he has any intuitive understanding of what social media is like. And so people, younger staffers and advisors and people just like feed him information. And he's like, oh, okay. I mean, like, how is he supposed to know what's happening on Twitter, right? It's a miracle that they've even gotten him to tweet on occasion. So I don't blame him that much for not being vehement about dispelling the Bernie Bro narrative, but it has boomeranged on him. Because, as usual, the pattern is that he validates the fallacious logic of a narrative that's being used to undermine him, which just guarantees that the narrative will snowball. Whether it's the Bernie Bros or Russiagate, it keeps happening. In terms of the Super Tuesday outcome, I think people should really recognize and grapple with the fact that Bernie was Russiagated at a critical juncture in the campaign before South Carolina. Now, the Russiagating actually occurred. Let me just plug my phone in here, sorry, just in case it stops. My phone charger is all wrapped up in my chair here, so I gotta extricate it, and it might simply be too stuck on my chair for me to get it out right now, which is embarrassing. Yeah, it is. So I'm gonna have to, if my feed drops out, so be it. The point is that Bernie was Russiagated at a critical juncture in the campaign. It was the day before the Nevada caucus. But the Russiagating didn't have much of an effect on the Nevada caucus because the Nevada caucus was small. Caucus states are dominated by highly energized activists and organizers, which Bernie specializes in, or his campaign specializes in. So he won Nevada by a huge margin regardless. But then you move on to the primary states, South Carolina and then Super Tuesday, and I guarantee you that the Russiagating narrative, these leaks, which said that Bernie is being helped by Russia but provided no evidence, I guarantee you normie Democratic voters who voted en masse in these primary states, a portion of them were aware of that charge and it factored into their decision making. They're like, oh my God, Russia's supporting Bernie. Donald Trump is a Kremlin compromised Nazi. How can we beat him if we have another Russia compromised candidate going up against him? That's the way some people think. I'm sorry to say. You can look at the polling data since 2016, which says that a majority of all Democratic voters believe that Russia not only interfered, they don't just believe that. They believe let me underscore that. This is over half of Democratic voters in many surveys have said that they believe that not only did Russia interfere, they believe Russia hacked the voting machines in 2016 and installed Trump into the presidency. And those are the voters who are mobilizing and radicalized right now. They're not radicalizing for socialism. They're not radicalizing for your pet left-wing cause. They're radicalizing simply as an anti-Trump emotional outburst. And that's not conducive to Bernie especially if he's being dogged by accusations of being backed by Russia. Remember then, Mike Bloomberg, at the next debate, which was widely watched, accused Bernie in like the first 5 minutes of being backed by Russia, and he didn't refute the charge correctly. So there's a lot of blame to go around there, including on Bernie himself, for not having enough understanding, I guess, of this issue to react properly in a way that insulates him from the political disadvantages. So I've been putting off writing a longer piece on the Bernie Russia stuff, but I will do it soon. So I'll give you that in due course. All right, people. Thank you for tuning in as usual, and we'll do it again soon. Bye bye. Hey everybody, Michael Tracy here. Wow, this is a big one. So I did a long, comprehensive debate/discussion with Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks. Some of you may know that I was employed by the Young Turks between 2017 and 2018. Spent around a year and a half there total. Did a lot of work that I'm very much proud of and that I think holds up, but throughout my tenure, there was always this running tension, or at least disagreement, between myself and most of the people who worked at the Young Turks, especially Cenk. He's the figurehead, he's a founder. So that disagreement was very much at the forefront, and the disagreement was over Trump-Russia. We had basically diametrically opposite views on almost every aspect of the story, and we even publicly debated on the Young Turks' main show. At one point in March of 2017, people can go back and look at that video. I was significantly heavy.
This is Chime, a mobile bank account and debit card with.
Okay, everybody. Good afternoon. The topic of whether Bernie Sanders can still win the Democratic nomination is obviously one being widely discussed at the moment, and there are a number of ways to answer that question. First of all, yeah, he could still win. There could be a seismic shift in the race. There could be some completely unforeseen event that occurs. Remember, we're dealing with two candidates, leaving aside Tulsi for the time being. We're dealing with two candidates who are in their upper 70s and have a history of health issues. So anything could happen, but what would need to happen is a relatively seismic shift in the race, because what the results from Super Tuesday, also known as Stupid Tuesday, demonstrated was that in the past week, or maybe a little bit more, there has been just such a rapid shift in public opinion that it's almost, I believe, without precedent in at least modern electoral history. So the shift that occurred a few days before the South Carolina primary, I would actually sort of identify it as after the Nevada caucus, leading up to Super or Stupid Tuesday, was just an incredibly volatile shift in American voter sentiment on an order that I really doubt we've ever seen before. Now, this is going to be studied and analyzed and commented upon endlessly, maybe for years to come, by political scientists and others. But at least my preliminary impression, and there's a lot of data to consume here. I'm not saying I've consumed all of it, but, this is sort of what I do, so I have consumed a lot. All of that data really indicates that something hugely dramatic happened in a very short span of time. Now, we know, obviously, that there were these strategic dropouts of the other candidates who are so-called moderates, which is, as I've mentioned before, a designation that I despise because it is so incredibly reductive. And there are other factors that, of course, probably played some role. I have no idea, aside from aimless speculation as to what the effect of this whole coronavirus thing might have been. It's possible, I guess, that the specter of a major pandemic sort of activates a conservative impulse in voters and makes them go for what they perceive the safe choice to be, and they largely perceive it to be Biden, even though I don't even think that's necessarily true, given his very obviously diminishing cognitive capacities, given his problems regarding Ukraine and his dealings there with respect to his son. That was the focal point of the impeachment proceedings, and so on and so forth. However, you do have to acknowledge that Biden, at least in head-to-head matchups with Trump, has performed, generally speaking, better than Bernie. And there's an interesting finding today in a poll, and by the way, I'm sort of glad that I'm not doing this on my phone, meaning I'm streaming from my phone, because it sort of frees me up to use my computer to reference things. And I know you don't care about that, but I'm killing time as I find the data nugget that I wanted to bring up. Okay, so there's a new CNN poll today, and please don't dispute the mythology of polls with me. You can dispute them somewhere else. I'm not saying all polls are perfect. I'm not saying that they need to be taken as gospel. But I find some of the paranoia about the nature of polls to be foolish. Guess what? Biden was leading in the polls for most of 2019, and look at what happened, okay? So, in the CNN poll, Biden has a +3 net favorability rating among all voters. Whereas this time in the 2016 cycle, Hillary Clinton's net favorability was -15. And now Bernie's favorability rating is -14. So Bernie's image among voters has gotten substantially worse, whereas Biden's is relatively good. So I'm not going to write off Biden potentially beating Trump, and I'm not going to necessarily reject out of hand that the voters who've decided that they want to vote for Biden because they think he's the most electable candidate are necessarily wrong. I don't have a time machine. I can't go to November and tell you what happens in a election matchup between Bernie and Trump. Who knows? Between Biden and Trump. Who knows? Hey, by the way, the economy seems to be crashing at the moment. I mean, I'm not an expert in this stuff, but it really looks quite bad from what I'm gleaning. You have the coronavirus seeming to be spreading fairly rapidly in the United States. I just saw that the executive director of the Port Authority, which basically runs most of the interstate connections between New York and New Jersey, he has coronavirus, and by the way, he also has authority over the airports in the region. So, I mean, I don't know. I'm not going to pretend like I have any special insight into how to cover or talk about this coronavirus subject. You know, I hope that it's alarmism, but I truly don't know. And I don't know what effect that would have on voter behavior necessarily. But at least the short-term prognosis for the economy is not looking particularly good, which seems to be the reason why Trump is systematically downplaying the severity of the coronavirus with crazy tweets And, I'm not somebody who necessarily dwells all that much on Trump's tweets. I think the fixation on them has caused a lot of people to be driven insane. But today, he's going wild on Twitter saying that this is just like the common flu and blah, 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 which I don't think is accurate. Again, I'm not a public health expert, but it seems like Trump is talking a lot of malarkey at the moment. And I don't know what effect that's going to have on the markets, etc. But the point is, I see a lot of people proclaiming with absolute certainty that Joe Biden would lose to Donald Trump. You don't know that. I don't know that. Nobody knows that. I remember at this point in 2016, everybody was insisting to me that there was zero chance that Donald Trump could win the election. I know retrospectively, a lot of people like to claim that they were believers in Trump's ability to win the 2016 election, but the vast, vast majority of those people are lying. They're trying to make themselves seem smart after the fact, when it was 100% conventional wisdom that Trump had almost no chance. And so, I have a similar mindset as to what could transpire in 2020. Look, the Democratic Party electorate is extremely mobilized right now. Look at some of these figures from the early primary states. I'll give you just one example here. The number of votes cast in the Texas Democratic Party increased by 122% between 2016 and 2020. Did you hear that? 122% more people voted in the 2020 Democratic primary than the 2016 Democratic primary. So the nature and size of these electorates has just shifted radically over the span of just 4 years. And so what implications does that have for the general election? Well, one of the harbingers of Hillary's weakness in 2016 was that turnout in the Democratic primaries was very low. And that is sort of an omen for voter interest. I've said this many times, but you have to remember, 2018 saw the highest turnout for any midterm election in the United States since 1914, in over 100 years. So huge segments of the electorate are extremely politicized, and you might even say radicalized. The problem for Bernie is they're not radicalized toward achieving democratic socialism. They're radicalized in reaction to Trump. And if you're radicalizing simply out of an averse reaction to Trump, there's no necessary reason why that should result in a desire for big structural change, as Elizabeth Warren likes to talk about, a desire for democratic socialism, as Bernie talks about, a desire for pretty much anything except removing Trump. So that is the framework in which most Democratic primary voters appear to be operating at the moment. What is a lesson of this cycle so far? Well, it's that most Democratic primary voters have no problem with the Democratic Party institutionally. They're not walking around with these deep-seated animosities and disaffections toward the institutional Democratic Party. They like the Democratic Party. They hold it in high regard. All the central figures in the Democratic Party are people that they generally like. Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, Elizabeth Warren, even Bernie Sanders they like. Bernie Sanders has high favorability ratings in the Democratic Party. So there's not this sort of massive disenchantment with the Democratic Party as such. It's just when that sort of gets filtered into voter behavior, they're taking the most quote-unquote conservative option. Because that's kind of what tends to happen when the entire political debate is framed around removing the incumbent president. That's why John Kerry won in 2004. I was still a teenager following that at the time, but it's a similar dynamic. There was huge amounts of resentment and animosity toward Bush, and Democrats just wanted the guy who seemed like he could get him out. They were wrong, but when you have people thinking in these terms, it doesn't lend itself to rational calculation necessarily, especially because of the hysteria that's been fomented around Trump. Whether it's the Russia stuff, impeachment, proclamations about concentration camps being established in the United States, this idea that Trump is destroying democracy, or he's forcing an authoritarian takeover of all democratic institutions, that he's a violently rabid racist. All of this sort of congeals into a response that is conservative in terms of the scope in which people think about what is achievable politically. Bernie expanded the scope of what people thought was achievable politically in 2016 because he was providing this alternative. Okay, everybody. Good afternoon. The topic of whether Bernie Sanders can still win the Democratic nomination is obviously one being widely discussed at the moment, and there are a number of ways to answer that question. First of all, yeah, he could still win. There could be a seismic shift in the race. There could be some completely unforeseen event that occurs. Remember, we're dealing with two candidates, leaving aside Tulsi for the time being. We're dealing with two candidates who are in their upper 70s and have a history of health issues. So anything could happen, but what would need to happen is a relatively seismic shift in the race, because what the results from Super Tuesday, also known as Stupid Tuesday, demonstrated was that in the past week, or maybe a little bit more, there has been just such a rapid shift in public opinion that it's almost, I believe, without precedent in at least modern electoral history. So the shift that occurred a few days before the South Carolina primary, I would actually sort of identify it as after the Nevada caucus, leading up to Super Stupid Tuesday, was just an incredibly volatile shift in American voter sentiment on an order that I really doubt we've ever seen before. Now, this is going to be studied and analyzed and commented upon endlessly, maybe for years to come, by political scientists and others. But at least my preliminary impression, and there's a lot of data to consume here. I'm not saying I've consumed all of it, but this is sort of what I do, so I have consumed a lot. All of that data really indicates that something hugely dramatic happened in a very short span of time. Now, we know, obviously, that there were these strategic dropouts of the other candidates who are so-called moderates, which is, as I've mentioned before, a designation that I despise because it is so incredibly reductive. And there are other factors that, of course, probably played some role. I have no idea, aside from aimless speculation as to what the effect of this whole coronavirus thing might have been. It's possible, I guess, that the specter of a major pandemic sort of activates a conservative impulse in voters and makes them go for what they perceive the safe choice to be, and they largely perceive it to be Biden, even though I don't even think that's necessarily true, given his very obviously diminishing cognitive capacities, given his problems regarding Ukraine and his dealings there with respect to his son. That was the focal point of the impeachment proceedings, and so on and so forth. However, you do have to acknowledge that Biden, at least in head-to-head matchups with Trump, has performed, generally speaking, better than Bernie. And there's an interesting finding today in a poll. And by the way, I'm sort of glad that I'm not doing this on my phone, meaning I'm streaming from my phone, because it sort of frees me up to use my computer to reference things. And I know you don't care about that, but killing time as I find the data nugget that I wanted to bring up. Okay, so there's a new CNN poll today. And please don't dispute the mythology of polls with me. You can dispute them somewhere else. I'm not saying all polls are perfect. I'm not saying that they need to be taken as gospel. But I find some paranoia about the nature of polls to be foolish. Guess what? Biden was leading in the polls for most of 2019, and look at what happened, okay? So, in the CNN poll, Biden has a +3 net favorability rating among all voters. Whereas this time in the 2016 cycle, Hillary Clinton's net favorability was -15. And now Bernie's favorability rating is -14. So Bernie's image among voters has gotten substantially worse, whereas Biden's is relatively good. So I'm not going to write off Biden potentially beating Trump, and I'm not going to necessarily reject out of hand that the voters who've decided that they want to vote for Biden because they think he's the most electable candidate are necessarily wrong. I don't have a time machine. I can't go to November and tell you what happens in a election matchup between Bernie and Trump. Who knows? Between Biden and Trump. Who knows? Hey, by the way, the economy seems to be crashing at the moment. I mean, I'm not an expert in this stuff, but it really looks quite bad from what I'm gleaning. You have the coronavirus seeming to be spreading fairly rapidly in the United States. I just saw that the executive director of the Port Authority, which basically runs most of the interstate connections between New York and New Jersey, he has coronavirus. And by the way, he also has authority over the airports in the region. So, I mean, I don't know. I'm not going to pretend like I have any special insight into how to cover or talk about this coronavirus subject. You know, I hope that it's alarmism, but I truly don't know. And I don't know what effect that would have on voter behavior necessarily. But at least the short-term prognosis for the economy is not looking particularly good, which seems to be the reason why Trump is systematically downplaying the severity of the coronavirus with crazy tweets. And, you know, I'm not somebody who necessarily dwells all that much on Trump's tweets. I think the fixation on them has caused a lot of people to be driven insane. But today, I mean, he's going wild on Twitter saying that this is just like the common flu and blah, 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 which I don't think is accurate. Again, I'm not a public health expert, but it seems like Trump is talking a lot of malarkey at the moment. And I don't know what effect that's going to have on the markets, etc. But the point is, I see a lot of people proclaiming with absolute certainty that Joe Biden would lose to Donald Trump. You don't know that. I don't know that. Nobody knows that. I remember at this point in 2016, everybody was insisting to me that there was zero chance that Donald Trump could win the election. I know retrospectively, a lot of people like to claim that they were believers in Trump's ability to win the 2016 election, but the vast, vast majority of those people are lying. They're trying to make themselves seem smart after the fact, when it was 100% conventional wisdom that Trump had almost no chance. And so, you know, I have a similar mindset as to what could transpire in 2020. Look, the Democratic Party electorate is extremely mobilized right now. Look at some of these figures from the early primary states. I'll give you just one example here. The number of votes cast in the Texas Democratic Party increased by 122% between 2016 and 2020. Did you hear that? 122% more people voted in the 2020 Democratic primary than in the 2016 Democratic primary. So the nature and size of these electorates has just shifted radically over the span of just 4 years. And so what implications does that have for the general election? Well, one of the harbingers of Hillary's weakness in 2016 was that turnout in the Democratic primaries was very low. And that is sort of an omen for voter interest. I've said this many times, but you have to remember, 2018 saw the highest turnout for any midterm election in the United States since 1914, in over 100 years. So huge segments of the electorate are extremely politicized, and you might even say radicalized. The problem for Bernie is they're not radicalized toward achieving democratic socialism. They're radicalized in reaction to Trump. And if you're radicalizing simply out of an averse reaction to Trump, there's no necessary reason why that should result in a desire for big structural change, as Elizabeth Warren likes to talk about, a desire for democratic socialism, as Bernie talks about, a desire for pretty much anything except removing Trump. So that is the framework in which most Democratic primary voters appear to be operating at the moment. What is the lesson of this cycle so far? Well, it's that most Democratic primary voters have no problem with the Democratic Party institutionally. They're not walking around with these deep-seated animosities and disaffections toward the institutional Democratic Party. They like the Democratic Party. They hold it in high regard. All the central figures in the Democratic Party are people that they generally like. Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, Elizabeth Warren, even Bernie Sanders they like. Bernie Sanders has high favorability ratings in the Democratic Party. So there's not this sort of massive disenchantment with the Democratic Party as such. It's just when that sort of gets filtered into voter behavior, they're taking the most quote-unquote conservative option. Because that's kind of what tends to happen when the entire political debate is framed around removing the incumbent president. That's why John Kerry won in 2004. I was still a teenager following that at the time, but it's a similar dynamic. There was huge amounts of resentment and animosity toward Bush, and Democrats just wanted the guy who seemed like he could get him out. They were wrong, but when you have people thinking in these terms, it doesn't lend itself to rational calculation necessarily, especially because of the hysteria that's been fomented around Trump. Whether it's the Russia stuff, impeachment, proclamations about concentration camps being established in the United States, this idea that Trump is destroying democracy, or he's forcing an authoritarian takeover of all democratic institutions, that he's a violently rabid racist. All of this sort of congeals into a response that is conservative in terms of the scope in which people think about what is achievable politically. Bernie expanded the scope of what people thought was achievable politically in 2016 because he was providing an alternative to just the establishment standard affair style of democratic politics. And people were willing to entertain that at greater rates in 2016, I think, because it wasn't as if it seemed like we were in the midst of this crisis constantly. We had 8 years of a Democratic president. People were willing to broaden their horizons. And that's just not the dynamic now. So can Bernie win? Okay, yeah, I guess he could still win. But you know what? I would think almost certainly would have to. So if the current trajectory continues, if there's no seismic event that changes the whole nature of the race, if it just sort of keeps muddling on as it is now, I would think that Bernie would have to win Michigan tomorrow in order to be viable. Okay? Michigan is sort of central to the premise behind Bernie's case for his electability. It's a state that Democrats have sort of tailored their entire public messaging since 2016, specifically in order to win in 2020, because it, of course, voted for Trump. And if Bernie can't win Michigan, then I don't see how that electability argument could be revived. Now, people tell me that the polls failed to predict that Bernie would win the Michigan primary in 2016. That is true. There was a huge polling error in the 2016 Michigan Democratic primary. But there are reasons to believe that there would not be comparable error now. And the latest polls show Biden ahead of Bernie in Michigan by 24 points. This is a poll that came out today from the Detroit Free Press. First of all, Biden is clearly on an upward trajectory nationwide. That's why he did so much better among people who decided at the last minute who they were going to vote for on Super Tuesday or Stupid Tuesday. And we have even since Super Tuesday, there's been a huge amount of coalescence around Biden. Kamala Harris endorsed him yesterday. Cory Booker endorsed him today. I'm sure there have been other endorsements, probably since I just started this video, that also demonstrate this rapid establishment coalescence. Whereas in 2016, it was just sort of different. Hillary seemed like she had been anointed the winner from the very beginning. So she had all her endorsements extremely early on. And then her support sort of gradually eroded. Whereas for Biden, now, because he had been not taken seriously enough for quite a while, the momentum, to use a cliche, that he's receiving just in the past week or so has a sort of air of freshness about it. It's like, oh, wow, Joe came back from the dead. All these people now just finally came to their senses and realized that Joe Biden is the best candidate. So it's just a little bit different. And in 2016, there, of course, were two primaries for each party. And the people who might have otherwise have voted in the Republican primary are now voting, a portion of them are voting in the Democratic primary, and they are the small but somewhat significant portion of never Trump type people, moderate Republicans, people who don't like Trump's managerial capacities. And they're voting in the Democratic primary, and they're voting either for Bloomberg or Trump, or Bloomberg or Biden on Super Tuesday. And now I would assume that those people are just going to vote for Biden. One thing that sorry, one second. I'm just looking at something else. So the polls in Michigan in 2016, they didn't capture a late break toward Bernie. That's why the polls had a huge error. But all signs seem to indicate that everything is breaking for Biden. There's no indication that there's a late break to Bernie right now. In fact, everything is trending in the opposite direction. And the polls polls did not adequately pick up on the white working class rural support that Bernie had in 2016, and Biden has eaten majorly into those margins far beyond what Hillary did. The white working class vote did not like Hillary in 2016, but they're at least much marginally more content with Biden. And I guess the one X factor is whether black voters in the Midwest significantly didn't impact black voters in the South. I think that's probable. I think black voters in the South will always be actual worst demographic for Bernie, especially in the West. So I would assume that he actually get more support in Michigan among black voters than he has in the South, or even in Mid-Atlantic, or in Virginia. Is that enough to make up for Bernie in Michigan, at least according to the way it's called, being woefully behind all the voters to the point that does not split that deficit possibly be surmountable? So in the Michigan poll, you were impressed. Again, I'm not saying you have to believe our poll. I'm saying take all this with a grain of salt. Okay, but this is actually consistent with the trend nationwide. And we can learn that by the actual voting data that has already occurred. Michigan, Biden is in it. Counterintuitive, but if voters are for it, you give sort of progressive legitimacy to Biden. And that's actually an asset. That's sort of a new action of voters that you can reach into. Whereas Elizabeth Warren gave offer Bernie Sanders any quote-unquote progressive legitimacy. So if she's sort of biding her time here to exert maximum leverage over the Democratic Party, then she's doing a rational thing by not endorsing Bernie right now. So enough of the begging, enough of the pleading. Even if she were to endorse the last minute like tonight, it wouldn't even make that much of a difference. I don't think. It's too late. So, you know what? I don't want to be super defeatist. Everybody watching this knows that I prefer Bernie on the substance by a huge long shot. But I'm also not going to be one of these, I'm sorry to say, Bernie propagandist types who only puts out the most positive spin on everything, who has this paranoid outlook where everything has to be rigged at all times. Is there rigging? Yeah. But the establishment rigging stuff isn't like a conspiracy necessarily. It's just what they do. It's how they exert power. And by rigging is like, I would differentiate rigging from establishment coalition. 2016 primary was rigged against Bernie. They hid debates in the dead of night, on the weekends. The superdelegates lined up Hillary way ahead of time, to the point that when they listed the delegate totals, they would include superdelegates and made it seem falsely Bernie was way behind. Bernie was not getting the amount of press coverage early on that he wanted to. In 2016, none of that's been true this time. Bernie has had every opportunity in the world to expand his coalition. You know what? It's not working. One thing that I mentioned yesterday, and I was serious about it, is what harm would it do for Bernie to wear the American flag pin? Does that sound silly? Perhaps. But the Bernie campaign and the sort of progressive activist world are always super eager to make empty symbolic gestures to voters around issues of race, gender, identity, and so forth. And yet, they have no tolerance with acquiescing to what is really a minor but potentially potentially significant symbolic gesture just to make Bernie seem like a more mainstream patriotic politician. I don't think Bernie hates America. I think Bernie actually likes America. He likes Africa. He likes America around like Americana, American culture. He obviously has a great affinity for huge swaths of the American people. So why not adopt something like Be Around America and sort of brand your vision of democratic socialism rather than that fulfill the best aspirations of the American people or something? You can't do that because a lot of left-wing activists, I'm sorry to say, have a deep hatred of America. And not just American foreign policy, which I also dislike immensely. Not just the American political system, which I also have huge amounts of criticism of. Not this sort of artificial corporatized culture, which I also am not any fan of in the slightest. They have something, they sort of like reject America writ large. They just don't like America. If you don't believe me, you've never interacted with left-wing activists, just ask a local trip. I think all of them, a very polarized and pro-segment of American left-wing activists who spend up their own country. And when you make circus to represent your campaign, who espouse that mindset, you're going to wonder why you're not making more inroads towards just normal Democrats? Really? They have surrogate at the Bernie rally in, I believe it was Michigan on Saturday. He was saying, oh, racism and capitalism are two sides of the same coin. That language might really excite highly energized portions of activists who spend a lot of time on Twitter, but that language is alien to the vast majority of the country, and they don't get it. So there will be a lot of recriminations here. I have a lot of opinions. And maybe I'll be proven dead wrong. Maybe he will win Michigan tomorrow. All I can do is sort of give you my best sense of things. All right, let me scan through and see if there's some chats I can missed here. There don't appear to be. I'll make sure we offended. All right. I'll leave it there for now. Have a good day. Maybe I'll do another video if I feel moved to tonight. Probably not. All right, bye-bye.
Any Chihuahua City. All your money went towards your bill, but you need a little gas to get you through the next payday. That's where Chime comes in. Ever seen a feature called Spot Me? It lets you cover up to $100 until you get paid next with no fees. What do you wait?
The Democratic Party is banking on Joe Biden. That's their big bet. And the voters are going out in droves to vote for this man who has no idea where he is, who can't talk, and has been called out by the left and the right forever. But the latest video from Joe Biden's campaign is one of the most disturbing, shocking bits of evidence of his cognitive decline I have ever seen. In his video, he was doing some virtual town hall because, as you know, we're all physically locked down around the country. And the cameras aren't working, but I kid you not. He starts muttering and mumbling. I have no idea what he's trying to say. And then he starts walking off camera. The dude, forgets that he's live streaming a town hall to talk to voters and starts walking away his campaign. Then puts up a graphic to cover the fact that Joe Biden doesn't know what he's doing or what he's talking about. Just muttering about estuaries and endangered species. I have no idea. Dude, I am angered, and I mean this. I really mean this. It is sad, and I am getting angry. You know what I see when I see Joe Biden? I see a man who never made it. He was the vice president, okay? He got close. He almost touched the clouds. And he wants to be president. And he wants to run. And he wants to have that under his belt. He wants to be that, have that legacy. But, man, he just can't do it. And for the Democratic Party to put him up like this while he just looks out of his mind is maddening. It is disrespectful and it is sad. There is a certain point in someone's life where you politely tell them the truth. You just can't do it anymore. The dude needs an intervention, but he's surrounded by desperate yes men who are terrified of Bernie Sanders and would put him in this position where he's losing his mind. It's time to lay down and read a book, buddy. This is sad. There's a lot to go through here, and I'm not going to cut any slack to the Bernie Sanders people, because while Joe Biden may be literally losing his mind in cognitive decline, you have a media trying to tell everyone, no, it's not true, don't believe it, Joe Biden's fine. And now the Bernie Sanders people think there's a grand conspiracy. And you know what? Based on Joe Biden's cognitive decline, based on the things he's tried to say and failed, I am absolutely surprised people are voting for this guy. But I think there's a harsh reality the Bernie Sanders people need to realize. One, youth vote doesn't come out. And two, even though Joe Biden is completely out of his gourd at this point, people might prefer that if it stops socialism. Look, these young people really love socialism, but older people don't, and they will vote for anything other than socialism. So let's take a look at the first story. I want to show you this from The Verge. Joe Biden's first virtual town hall was an absolute technical nightmare. And I'm going to show you. But the first thing I have to show you is this story. Joe Biden forgets year, meanders off frame in disastrous live stream. It's sad, man. I'm looking at this old guy who wants to have something he just can't have anymore. Look, when I was younger, I wanted to be one of the best skateboarders in the world. I'm in my 30s. That'll never happen. I grew up. I moved on. I found what I was good at. And I did what I had to do. And not everyone's going to be the rock star, the astronaut, or the president. And when you're 77 and you're having trouble speaking and thinking and you're forgetting where you are, dude, it's time to realize you're not going to be the president, man. Let's read this story. Before I get started, head over to timcast.com/donate if you'd like to support my work. There are several ways you can help support me. But the best thing you can do is share this video. Look, I think Joe Biden's voters, the people who aren't paying attention, need a hard wake-up call. Now, I'm going to throw a little cold water on the Bernie supporters, the ones who are coming out screaming that they think there's rigging going on, like that the Democrats are actually hard changing votes. But I still think if you're a Bernie progressive, people need to see what's going on with Biden. Absolutely need to see it. So let's just get into this. The other thing I'll add is make sure you subscribe to this channel. Hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell. YouTube is no longer, for the most part, doing autoplay recommendations or, after video recommendations, and they are suppressing my content and many others. If you want to make sure you get these videos because you like what I do, subscribe, notification bell, you get the gist. This story is from Breitbart. I know many people might not like it, but just bear with it. They're absolutely harsh on Joe Biden, but they include commentary from progressive leftists who agree. Listen, man, when you get the progressive left and you get the Trump right agreeing about something, there's got to be something there. And the media and the Democratic establishment can try all they like to sweep this under the rug, but it is not. I just don't see it working. I see a lot of people who aren't paying attention voting for Biden, and if they knew it was actually happening, they would be shocked. But I think it's fair to say maybe people really know, and they just really don't want Bernie Sanders. Breitbart says, Grandpa Joe Biden wants to run the country and save us from coronavirus when he can't even run a live stream and has no idea what year it is. On Friday, Grandpa Joe held what his campaign billed as a virtual town hall in Illinois. In my colleague Kyle Olson's must-read reporting of the event, you'll discover the whole thing was a fiasco, like something out of a sitcom. Guests appeared and then disappeared. The sound was garbled. People were introduced, followed by an awkward pause. When they didn't appear, babies cried. I literally, this is a disaster. This campaign is a disaster. The Democratic Party is in shambles, man. And I know I've said it before, but this is it's just getting worse. I was looking at other videos I made, and I'm like, the Democratic Party collapse, unmitigated disaster, and I'm like, how do I say this again? How do I keep saying it? It's getting worse, man. It really is. Biden seemed to be reading from a teleprompter, but the broadcast suffered from severe tech issues as Biden's words were caught in a feedback loop, muddying the whole presentation and making the candidate nearly indecipherable. After starting 2 hours late, the fiasco lasted about 45 minutes. For my money, this clip from The Honeymooners, where Ralph and Ed attempt to do a live television commercial, is the funniest thing ever captured on film. Sounds like Grandpa Joe just took that crown. Technical difficulties, however, are technical difficulties.
Any two Wawa Sizzlies are now $4, from applewood smoked bacon to savory sausage. Grab any two delicious Sizzlies you crave. Sizzly time is back, and breakfast is better than ever. Any two Sizzlies are $4. Gotta have a Wawa.
Difficulties. That doesn't mean those technical difficulties are not newsworthy. After all, we are talking about a major presidential campaign, but the competency or lack thereof of the people handpicked by Biden to run his campaign. So it is a bit disconcerting that Joe and his staffers were unable to put on the equivalent of a video podcast, something millions of everyday Americans are able to do every day in their basements without a hitch. I'm literally in my basement where I put a studio together, and I'm complaining about my feelings to a camera. And Joe Biden, a presidential campaign, couldn't pull this off. You know what, man? The Democratic Party right now has the capabilities. Doesn't even have the capabilities of my 10-year-old niece, who knows how to make YouTube videos. This is shocking. But when you see what Biden actually says, look at this. Jordan Ull, anything but a conservative. It's a progressive guy, as far as I know. In a bizarre, meandering live stream put on by Joe Biden's campaign today, he forgets what year it is, and when, if he doesn't lose, he would be in office. At another point, he seemingly forgets he's on a live stream and walks out of frame. The feed cuts away to a logo instead. You've got to be kidding me, man. Is this what you were putting up against Trump? Trump could be facing a stock market drop to zero, and he's going to trounce Joe Biden, if that's the option that people in America have. Worse still is people are going to lose confidence in the system. But you know what? You reap what you sow. Look at this. For those that are watching, I'm not going to play the whole clip, but you can see Joe Biden walking off frame. He's in the middle of a live stream, and he just turns around and walks away. He's done this before. There's a video of him at some town hall event or something. He's on stage, looking at the audience. He turns around towards the back wall, it's a big screen, and walks away while mumbling something. He keeps doing this. I can't believe there are people who are trying to pretend like Joe Biden hasn't lost his mind. And I'm not saying that to be mean, man. I feel like the people around him are disgusting individuals. You need to tell Joe it's time to stop. They should have stopped him a long time ago. Pete Buttigieg ain't perfect, but Pete Buttigieg is in his 30s and is infinitely better than Joe Biden. They're both the moderates. It's fine. I know you might not like them. Many people don't like them. But come on, man. To make this guy go through this sprint and he can't even talk was a ridiculous idea. But you know what? Maybe they just couldn't stand up to Grandpa Joe. When he said, no, I want to do this, they should have said, no, absolutely not. Instead, they were like, you do it. You do it, Joe. Apparently, Obama told him you don't have to do this. So at least some people tried to get him to stop. It's sad, man. So the whole thing was mired by technical difficulties, garbled videos, failing cameras, weird sounds, babies crying. Everybody's taking note. It was a disaster. Check this out. From The Intercept, Glenn Greenwald. Democrats and their media allies impugned Biden's cognitive fitness. Now they feign outrage. Now they're angry, saying it's a coordinated media campaign to smear Joe Biden and make it seem like he's lost the plot, like his brain isn't working. There's a trending hashtag, Biden's cognitive decline, because everyone knows. You've got the progressive left and the Trump right unified. You know why? It's reality. The media is lying. They lie. It's what they do. They lie about progressives when they're going up against their establishment candidates. They smear Cenk of the Young Turks. Now, I wish the Bernie people and the progressives would actually call out the media like the Trump people have been doing for a long time, because we know they're lying. And now you can see it hitting both sides. Guess what? If you notice that Joe Biden ain't all there, you're not alone. And you're not crazy. That's the reality. But hey, if you turn on the mainstream media, guess what you'll see? They will tell you, you have lost your mind. I'm sorry, man. When the Young Turks can see it, and when Trump supporters can see it, you cannot deny. You can try. You can try, but no one's going to buy it. Check this out. From the Washington Monthly. The disinformation campaign being launched against Biden. There is no data to support the allegation that he is in cognitive decline. Data. Let me say that again for you. There is no data. Are you kidding? Is someone going to put together a graph of Joe Biden's gaffes exponentially increasing? Or are we going to watch the videos of him struggling to speak, meandering off camera, mumbling about gibberish, estuaries and danger? What are you talking about, Joe? It's getting worse, man. Apparently for the next debate they wanted to have him sit down. They know, and they are putting him through this because they are just bad people, or they're that desperate. Now I'll tell you what, Bill Maher, good dude. I like Bill Maher. Bill Maher said some dumb stuff. Notably, he said, "Bring on the recession if it gets rid of Trump," and he got slammed hard for it. And you know what? He owned it. He was like, people are mad at me for saying it. Yeah, whatever. Hey, that's not a bad. I think it's still dumb he said that. But you know what I respect? That he says something and says whatever. Do something about it. He actually stands up for himself, even if he thinks stupid things. I think that thing is stupid, but I think a lot of what he says is actually on point. He called Joe Biden a little cuckoo. Thank you, Bill Maher, for calling this out. The media likes to pretend like it's only conservatives going after Joe Biden, ignoring the progressive left who have been going after him as well. They say it's a Trump GOP smear campaign to shut down Joe Biden. Knock it off. No one's buying it. More than around half, a little bit less than half of the people voting right now are voting for Bernie Sanders. And look, Bernie Sanders is a 78-year-old man who had a heart attack recently, and he's a socialist. These are things that are huge negatives for his campaigns. Sad reality. I gotta say, even with that being said, I'm surprised people are voting for Joe Biden. I really do believe if people just saw Joe Biden fumbling around and wandering off camera, they'd start to realize he's not a good choice. Now, I'm not saying Bernie's the right choice for this country, but you gotta admit, with all of Bernie's problems, the heart attack, right? At least he can say his ideas. And Bernie recently came out calling out the globalization and foreign trade policies with China that resulted in a national security threat, and that was very impressive to me. Sounds like how now I'm pulling a Joe Biden. Sounds like how Bernie used to speak back in 2015. Then he started embracing all this progressive stuff. I think Bernie's going to start coming back to the center now, or at least a little bit. Not on economic policy, but at least in rational thought, like border protections and such. Now that he's trying to win, he's trying to beat Joe Biden. He's got to adopt more moderate policies. But I actually do have this tweet. Check it out. Senator Bernie Sanders, quote, "As a result of globalization and our disastrous trade policies, we have been outsourcing millions of jobs in factories overseas that have gutted our economy." And he's right. He's absolutely right. So listen, there's a lot wrong with Bernie's ideas. In my opinion, he doesn't know how to pay for things, how much they'll cost. But come on, man. You don't have to like the guy to recognize that Biden should not be the nominee. At this point, they have the choice between Tulsi Gabbard and Bernie Sanders. And as much as I've been a fan of Tulsi, come on, let's be realists. She's not getting that support that she needs. She's got a decent following of people. They very much support her. But Bernie is the guy. And I guess you can say either people just don't know about Biden or they really, really hate socialism. But I want to show you some progressives. This is from Caitlin Johnstone. I don't want to accuse her of being a progressive. I think she's at least anti-Trump. She wrote this on Medium in September. Biden's brain is Swiss cheese, and it's creepy that we're not talking about it. I completely agree. I'm talking about it right now because it scares me. The idea that this is what they're going to prop up. Listen, man, I don't care who you want to support. Maybe you're a Trump populist. Maybe you're a Bernie populist. Can we all just agree, before anything else, it should not be Joe Biden? I'm sorry, man. I feel really bad for the guy. I do. Look, I know he's gone through a history. He's voted for policies that have been controversial. I'm not going to blame someone based off of the mistakes of the past that our society was going through that was acceptable at the time. I think it's dumb to look back 40 years and say, how could you support that? Well, listen, man. Society believed things and did things, and we progressed beyond that, and people changed their opinions. But what's sad now is that I just feel like this guy, he's nearing the end of the road. And what does he have? He was vice president. Bravo, dude. Second place, man. Silver medals are awesome, but he wants the gold. And so even though he's lost the ability, he's still reaching for it. And it's just sad, man, to see this guy really trying to compete. It's like seeing an old dude trying to compete in the Olympics. It's like, come on. You got to make way for the younger people to take the reins. It's just not going to be you. And Bernie is actually older than Joe Biden. But I'll say it again, at least Bernie Sanders can speak English. Now I'm going to throw some shade up to the Bernie people. Y'all don't get a free pass just because Joe Biden has lost the plot. Check this out. First, Bernie bros are warning of a massive exodus if Democrats nominate Joe Biden. That I get. Hey, man, I'm not going to blame you. I wouldn't vote for Joe Biden. That guy's clearly out of it. And actually, the policies he's presented, like public option stuff, I'm more likely to agree with him but there's a certain point where you think he just doesn't have the ability. So now the Bernie progressives, many of whom rightly recognize that Joe Biden should not be the nominee, are jumping ship. All I can really say is, I guess, good for you, man. Stand up for what you believe in. I certainly have no interest in being involved with whatever it is they're doing. I don't want to vote for Bernie either. But at least there are people who are Democrats who are willing to say no and walk away. They might not walk away to the Republican Party. They might not walk away to a third party, Libertarians, Green Party, whatever. But they're going to walk away from Joe Biden. And it bums me out because I feel so sad this guy's being put through this. But it's his own fault. You reap what you sow. But now I got to show you where the fringe is stepping up. Bernie supporters, you got to check yourself. First, another story from Breitbart. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Biden is winning because of rampant voter suppression in this country. Okay, first of all, Joe Biden actually won the African-American vote, primarily in South Carolina and many other states. Bernie Sanders is not doing that well. I think in Michigan and Mississippi as well. So no, it's not voter suppression. Biden is just doing better than Bernie Sanders. And to me, that is kind of freaky, I got to admit. They say, they have a quote, I guess. Thursday on Fox News' channel special report, Rep. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said her candidate Bernie Sanders is losing in the Democratic Party's presidential primary to former Vice President Joe Biden because of rampant voter suppression. When asked by Bret Baier, you're Bernie Sanders' most prominent surrogate. Was it difficult to witness his swift fall from the frontrunner status? He is almost a protest candidate now. Your thoughts, she said. One of the things that we saw with Bernie Sanders' leadership, even today, is how transformative it is for the American people. Just today, he laid out a very strong plan in response to the coronavirus for everyday people, for Main Street, not just Wall Street. He's talking about how do we make sure that everyone who needs access to Medicare can get it? How do we make sure people aren't getting booted out of their homes, whether it's not being able to afford the mortgage payment this month or not being able to afford their rent payment? He goes on to say, Bret Baier asks, you did a campaign event at the University of Michigan, 10,000 people. It was rock star status, but those kids did not show up, at least if you look at the numbers. Overall, this race, how can you say the progressive position is still prevailing nationwide when Joe Biden is winning so much? And she said, I think the one thing that isn't being talked about is the rampant voter suppression in this country. Right there in Ann Arbor, where we had that rally, those kids were waiting 3 hours in line to vote in Michigan. When we talk about who's turning out, it's who's turning out and who's not turning out. Baier interrupted. You think voters didn't get to vote who wanted to vote in Michigan? And she said, absolutely. There's more that we need to do in terms of turning out youth vote. We need to make sure that we are inspiring young people to turn out. But when you do turn out, you should not be waiting 3, 4, 7 hours in order to vote. Yes, she's right about that. You shouldn't have to wait that long. But come on, man. Voter suppression now? They claim Republicans are suppressing vote. Now they're claiming the Democrats are. You know what? No, just stop. Bernie Sanders did not get the minority vote, and the youth vote did not turn out. Period. I'm sorry. Take a look at this. This user on Twitter said, dude, I'm sorry, but there's no way this is possible. LMFAO. And it's a picture of Michigan where Biden dominated every single district. This shocked many Bernie supporters because he won Michigan last time. Let me show you some. Here was one of the responses. Bernie Sanders dominated in the youth vote, 29%. And Joe Biden dominated the older vote, 71%. You know what that means? Biden won 71% of the votes in Michigan, and Bernie won 29%. You can brag all day and night about how youth voters support you, but they do not vote. It's not suppression when they choose not to vote. Of course, there's more, because they're taking it one step further, and activists are now arguing the DNC is cheating the primaries because the exit polls don't match the margin of error for the actual results. Now, that's interesting, and I think it's worth noting, for sure. But it could just be that young people and enthusiastic activists love screeching for Bernie, and regular people walk in, check the D on the box, and walk away without saying anything. There's a lot of reasons why the polls might show this margin of error. The polls are just wrong, perhaps. They were wrong in 2016 across the board. Many of them are still wrong today, so why should I trust any of the polls are right today? It stands to reason that Americans have said over and over again they don't want to vote for socialism. Now, about half of Democrats would, and we're seeing it. Yeah, they're choosing Bernie, but not enough to get him the win. Most Democrats are still rejecting socialism. So they show these images. TDMS research saying the margin of error in the exit polls were too wild to be accurate. And now some people are even tweeting that the UN standards that show that if the margin of error in the exit poll is too great, there must be some kind of election rigging. I mean, these are interesting points. But come on, man. Let's just face the facts. The Democratic Party as a whole is just it's in pure chaos. The campaigns for both have become unmitigated disasters. Bernie supporters, desperate for a win, turn to the only explanation possible, that the DNC is actually flipping hard votes. Now look, man, we know they've cheated in terms of the rules of the primary debate. I've complained about it nonstop. Yes, they are cheating. But flipping the votes in the primary system, that would mean that the volunteers in these places are in on the take. There's too many people, I just don't buy it. The simple solution is old people coming out won't vote for socialism. That's really it. Now you can look for every excuse in the book. It's just likely not the case, man. But there's a petition. I love it. Nearly 22,000 people have signed this Move On petition. Let me refresh this to make sure. I bet the numbers have gone up. 22,368. UN is needed to oversee Democratic primaries due to election fraud. This isn't coming from Trump supporters. It's not Trump supporters that are coming out saying Joe Biden's lost his mind. It is the progressive left saying the DNC is cheating, they're flipping votes, it's voter fraud, and Joe Biden's gone nuts. So now you can see the American people from Bernie to Trump agree. This system isn't working. They think it's rigged. You've got Trump supporters thinking that there's election fraud across the board, voter fraud. Well, the progressive Democrats agree with you. Both sides are correctly recognizing that Joe Biden is not all there anymore. And you know what? The Democratic Party has already admitted they will absolutely hurt themselves if it means stopping Bernie Sanders. That's not a conspiracy. That's what they said. I think it was Politico, or no, it was New York Times, I think, interviewed several superdelegates, party members, and they basically said that's what they're going to do. In the end, maybe they're putting up Biden on purpose. I don't know. Maybe they think it's the best they could muster. I mean, Biden's not even B tier, okay? You know, Barack Obama, he's the A team. He became president. You got Buttigieg, Klobuchar, you got Beto. They're all very B team-like. But Joe Biden is not even on par with them because at least the rest of them can talk, man. You know, I've said it, but I guess it bears repeating. Trump is going to win. I don't think there's any amount of economic damage that could occur that's going to stop Donald Trump, and I mean that. Maybe I'm wrong. I've been wrong before. I'm wrong a lot, and things change. I look back at some of my old videos. I'm like, man, I can't believe that was the case. I was worried Bloomberg was actually going to get the nomination. Now he's dropped out. I was wrong about that. Listen, I base my opinions off of the current information available to me, and as time goes on, my opinion's going to change based on relevant data. But the more we see Joe Biden, the more I think it's clear that if the Democrats continue to go this route, propping up Joe Biden, I do not see a path to victory for a man who can't even talk, let alone stand up for 2 hours, and they're going to have him be sitting down. Now, this is going to be interesting. They probably won't do it. Initially, they said it would be a sit-down audience Q&A, but because of recent events, there's not going to be an audience. They're moving to D.C. So sitting down would be pointless. There's not going to be audience Q&A. They're going to have to debate with moderators. The whole thing is a disaster. And with the latest news happening around the world, I'm not sure how they're going to even have the convention. So I guess we will just wait and see. I'm going to say it one more time. Watching Joe Biden flail around up there makes me sad. It does. I see a guy with ambition, and I can respect that. I see a guy who's not perfect. I can respect anyone reaching for the stars. But there's a certain point where you've reached your limit, and it's time to say enough. We all get old. We all, our abilities decline. It's a sad reality of life. A lot of people resist it, but I think it's just something to be accepted. We get older. We're not as good physically or mentally as we once were. I'm in my 30s. I know. I'm gonna be his age at one point. I'm halfway there. I'm halfway. I'm a little bit. I'm just about halfway there. So I get it. I'm not gonna cry about it, and I'm not gonna pretend like I should be the one with the keys to the castle simply because I always wanted it. Nah, I have no problem saying at a certain point it's time to hand the keys off to the kids. To say it's your turn now. This is your world. Joe Biden needs to do that because watching him struggle is just sad. I'll see you all in the next segment at 6 p.m. YouTube.com/TimCastNews. Thanks for hanging out.
Okay, people, so I would assume most of you watching right now are self-isolating, or at least not going outdoors unless absolutely necessary, and especially not attending any gatherings with substantial amounts of people present, because it might be a minor lifestyle adjustment you have to make right now, or even a major one, but the benefits in terms of not engaging in any activities that could exacerbate the spread of the coronavirus, those benefits far outweigh the costs, at least in my judgment. So I'm not going out. I'm not doing anything except for a brief trip that I've had to make to get just essential items. And there's zero reason to doubt that it's going to get significantly worse in the coming days. I actually need to get more food stocked up because I just don't tend to buy a lot of food at one time. I've gotten some stuff, but I don't know how long it's going to last me necessarily. I guess I can get it delivered, but this is real. You people who know me and follow me understand. I think that I'm a skeptic of prevailing media narratives, but this is not a confabulated media narrative. Okay, maybe there's some self-interested hysteria woven in to various aspects of how the media is talking about this, and I accept that there are probably some media liberals who want to inflate things to some degree to make Trump look bad, but number one, Trump really does look bad in terms of how he's handled this. I went back and watched a clip of him at a rally in South Carolina on February 29th, right before the primary, where he's talking about how we're totally prepared, nothing to worry about, and that any criticism of him or his administration in terms of their readiness to handle coronavirus, that's all a hoax, in his words. So his poor public communications skills, or his poor public communications approach, has, in all likelihood, exacerbated the spread of the coronavirus in the United States, because it meant that huge swaths of the country were not taking it seriously, because they were listening to him and assuming that this was just a cynical attempt to tear Trump down. And bear in mind, it is true that there have been many cynical and hysterical attempts to tear Trump down. I've focused on many of them to the point that I get accused of being a fascist for disputing many of the sort of prevailing characterizations of things that Trump does, whether it's the Russia saga, impeachment, or just the sort of the daily outrages that get blown out of proportion regarding Trump. So if anybody can't, I would think, be accused of just trying to hysterically criticize Trump for things that don't warrant it would be me. And yet, in talking about the stuff online, I get the MAGA people saying, oh, you're just trying to, harm Trump politically. I mean, I honestly don't care at this point if it harms Trump politically. That is not foremost in my mind at all. Obviously, yeah, it's something that you think about, but it's not what's guiding my interpretation of these events. I mean, they're shutting down everything in the country. So, I mean, do you think that major industries, whether in sports, entertainment, hospitality, etc., they would just be sacrificing all this economic activity because of a conspiracy to harm Trump? I mean, give me a break. What there really should be now is a nationwide, moratorium. I don't know exactly what the enforcement mechanism is. I don't know if you should be fining or criminalizing people who violate such moratoriums, but there should be a nationwide moratorium, just like we're seeing now in Spain and France and Italy to prevent people from going out if they don't absolutely have to. I mean, it's insane that I'm getting these photos of people out drinking at crowded bars and restaurants to celebrate St. Patrick's Day today. I mean, to me, that's a failure either of public communications and informing people about the nature of an extremely severe health threat, or it's a failure of empathy on the part of people who think that it's perfectly fine for them to worsen the spread of a pandemic. It's probably a combination of the two, because I don't think that if most people actually had the information, that they would be engaging in this behavior. Most Americans are empathetic. They don't want to impose unnecessary risk on their older relatives or their older neighbors. And by the way, we don't even know that the risk is necessarily even confined to old people. I mentioned this on Twitter, but the doctor from Wuhan who initially tried to spread the word about the severity of this virus and later died, he was only 33 years old. And if we scale up the number of people infected to potentially be into the millions, and that's the trajectory right now, then even if the mortalities, even if the fatalities sort of cluster in the higher edge of the age spectrum, you're still going to get outliers among people who are like in their 20s and 30s, right? And at a great enough quantity of infection cases, that's going to result in a lot of deaths too. So, I mean, don't think that just because you're, in my age group or something, that means that you're necessarily, home free on this. And either way, you shouldn't want to be just accepting that you're going to be a carrier of the infection, and then you interact with others and infect them. And remember, you don't have to be symptomatic to be a carrier of the virus. So you can go around, infect others, and they can unknowingly interact with an older person who is more vulnerable, has a compromised immune system, and then that person dies. So, I mean, it's a extremely serious and, yes, scary situation. And I've been cognizant of it for at least a month now, but I admit I've been focused on other things, namely the primary impeachment for a while. I was just epidemiology is not my wheelhouse, so it's not something that I routinely follow. But probably around a month or so ago, or a little bit more, I was essentially convinced that this is going to become a major issue. But even now, over the past couple of days, it is. I didn't absorb it in a way that really prepared me to reckon with the true consequences of what's occurring. Think of all the stuff that's shut down. It's insane. Thank God, Hoboken, New Jersey, the mayor just put out a statement saying all bars and restaurants are shut down. That should be the same in everywhere. Effective immediately. I mean, there's no time to wait anymore. They've shut down. You know this. All the sports leagues, Disney World, Disneyland, everything. So, if you're so paranoid that you think that all this is just a vast conspiracy, I mean, take a look what's happening in Italy. Take a look what's happening in France, Spain. I mean, this is not some kind of conspiracy. Are there people who will manipulate it and leverage it to further their own sort of cynical purposes? Yeah, that doesn't diminish the fundamental severity of the problem. So I'm getting tired of people, messaging me and tweeting me and posting on YouTube about how I'm being hysterical or panicked. I don't think it's hysterical to say to yourself, okay, I'm going to adjust my lifestyle for now and not go out, not attend large gatherings, and, if it turns out to be a hoax, okay, then for a week or so I wasn't able to go out. Is it that bad in the grand scheme of life? And it's not a hoax. Don't tell me this stuff about how it's regular flu. It's not. I mean, you people some of these people are just tedious with this stuff. Anyway, so I put Tulsi in the headline because she's still in the race, and I constantly get, people asking me why she's still in the race. Well, I mean, let me just read to you the reason why she is still in the race, as written by her. This is what she put out in an email. This is quoting Tulsi. The corporate media often speculates about my motive for running, as if it's some kind of dark mystery. They struggle to understand how someone could make decisions, as I always do, based on principle and conviction rather than political calculations of the so-called horse race. I'm running for president to take the trillions of taxpayer dollars that we'll be spending on this new Cold War, our long-standing counterproductive policy of carrying out regime change wars, and direct this precious treasure to meet the very real needs of the American people. This includes investing in protecting our country against pandemics and the novel coronavirus. If we had not spent trillions of dollars on regime change wars, we could have invested in our healthcare system. But we didn't. Our leaders were short-sighted, and thousands, possibly tens of thousands of Americans will now suffer because of their short-sightedness. And it might be more than that. Like, into the hundreds of thousands. I hope not. I hope it doesn't reach that level, but we got to prepare ourselves for that possibility. Especially given the idiocy of how people are behaving right now. She continues, I'll continue to do my best to share my message with the American people. With your help, I will continue to speak up regarding the necessity of bringing about a sea change in our foreign policy and therefore our domestic policy. This is why I refuse to be silenced. Right now, the United States, Russia, and China have thousands of nuclear missiles aimed at one another. Trump has continued a trend that began with the Bush administration in systematically dismantling treaties that have helped prevent nuclear war. The safeguards that had been in place for decades are crumbling. Where is the debate on these issues? In the Democratic primary race, it still hasn't happened. What will Joe Biden's foreign policy be? What will Bernie Sanders' foreign policy be? What advisors will they bring on? And what are the agendas of those people? Their relationships with the powerful foreign policy establishment. We, the people, deserve to know. The powerful political and corporate media elites have done everything they can to undermine my candidacy since the day I announced it. The false, malicious caricature they have presented is an insult to any standard of fairness and decency, and most of all to the voters themselves. So I will continue bringing my message directly to the people and let them evaluate me for who I really am, without the mediation of warmongering propagandists. My purpose in running for president has never been about self-promotion or self-aggrandizement. It's been to tell the American people what they need to hear, because all our lives are depending on it. Okay, that makes sense to me. Is that a sufficient rationale for you people constantly asking this question about why she's running? Is she likely to get a majority of delegates in the Democratic primary race? No, she was never likely to get that. I never claimed that she was likely to get that. But she has gotten 2 delegates, and that's 2 delegates more than Kamala Harris will ever get, or Andrew Yang for that matter. So, I think that's actually worthy. And if she can use the platform that she has available to her as someone who's still an active candidate to continue propounding this message with nobody other than her, then it's 100% policy of imposing sanctions on places like Iran and Venezuela are going to inhibit the ability of the population of those countries from containing the coronavirus. Iran's President Rouhani put out a plea tonight to ask that countries please remove the sanctions on Iran because they are preventing them from acquiring the medical and hygienic and nutritional resources that they need in order to stem the spread of coronavirus. And Iran is one of the worst outbreaks in the country. Now, I know a lot of these MAGA neocon people love inflicting unnecessary suffering on Iranians. But even if you don't care at all about Iranians and you want them to suffer, guess what? This policy ends up harming the Americans as well, because if the coronavirus teaches us anything, it's that infectious diseases do not stay limited to one particular country. They spread. So, policy is always going to have front of mind the foreign policy implications of whatever issue is at hand. Right now, given that coronavirus is at hand, she's going to be talking about foreign policy questions. Talking about how if so much money was squandered, billions of dollars was squandered to 9/11, hey, maybe some percentage of the money could have been invested in building up our domestic defenses against pandemics. Shocker, right? I mean, whoever could have anticipated that? You would have been a little bit more prepared to mobilize resources to actually have testing widely available months ahead of time, where it actually would have made a difference. Instead of spending trillions of dollars on modernizing our nuclear weapons arsenal, which only inflicts death if it were ever used. Maybe we could have actually built up some capabilities that have the effect of preserving life. But I know that's a little bit difficult for a lot of people in the media and political establishment to fathom, which is why they always impute some kind of sinister, malign motive to Tulsi, as if she can't possibly believe what she says she believes, and those stated reasons that she provides for her candidacy can't possibly be the real reason. There has to be some other nefarious motive. There is no nefarious motive that I've ever ascertained. I've followed her now very, very, very closely, okay? And it's a shame that in the so-called debate tomorrow between Bernie and Biden, which, I don't know, may not even happen, I guess they'll probably have to have it in a quiet room where Joe can sit comfortably and won't get too tired. But, I very much doubt that there's going to be any discussion of the foreign policy elements of coronavirus, such as the sanctions regimen, that is exacerbating the global suffering and actually imperiling Americans. Because if you create conditions around the world that impoverish populations, that deprive them of hygienic and medical and nutritional resources, then you're creating conditions that worsen pandemics, and those pandemics, of course, eventually migrate to
on a lot of people's minds, which I am sure consolidating into one question is this the start of a new global recession? And the answer is maybe. We don't know. And as I've told you before, economists and people in general are very, very bad at predicting the economy in general. Here's what we do know, and here are a few thoughts on this. Number one, the system we have has booms and busts. That goes back a very long time. So every year that we don't have a bust, we don't have a downturn, we are a year closer to the next downturn. I've been saying this since 2014, something like that on the program. There were people predicting it would be in 2016. There were people predicting it would be in 2017. I've never predicted exactly when it would be. I've said at some point there is going to be a downturn. Right now, we find ourselves in this very precarious situation with multiple record downturns and then erratic sort of partial recoveries in the stock market. The stock market is not the economy, but certainly when we were looking at multiple 1,000-point swings in a single day, one way or the other, that is a sign that we have a very fragile situation. Number two, the virus stuff, of course. And what you're now seeing that I think is actually going to lead to a positive conversation, in a sense, in the middle of really bad things going on, people losing money out of their retirement accounts, people getting sick with the virus, oil prices all over the place, Trump trying to frame this battle around oil prices as good for Americans because it'll make gas cheaper. Personally, I would rather not lose 15% in 2 weeks out of my retirement account than pay 20 cents less per gallon of gas. Maybe that's because I don't drive around that much. For some people, maybe the gas prices are more impactful. Everybody's situation is different. But if we are seeing the beginning of a global recession, what's really important to understand is that while it may have been triggered by a combination of the virus causing fears and panic selling, which then leads to companies downward revising profit estimates, which makes more selling happen, which drops the stock market more, which eliminates a lot of money and liquidity that could be available for business to expand, and it causes the self-fulfilling prophecy. So the virus, profit, all this stuff is hiding. That may indeed be what we consider triggers what is going on right now, or what may be happening. But it doesn't change the underlying fragility of the system. I spoke about this earlier. When you have an economy that has, I don't remember offhand the number, it's like half of the U.S. population can't afford an unexpected $400 expense, or maybe it was 40% can't afford $1,000. It's something like that, right? That is a fundamentally fragile situation. So when you have a president bragging about wages are up 1.5%, or whatever the case may be, that doesn't change if cost of living is up, that people are living on the edge. People are living paycheck to paycheck. When you have a tax reform plan done, where the lion's share of the tax savings go to people who are already fine and have no real need to spend any more money, to the very, very rich, rather than the lion's share of the dollars going to people who actually are depending on their earned income and wages to fund their lifestyles, which are not extravagant, by the way, you have a fragile situation. You have the wealthy accumulating more at the same time that you have people who are living paycheck to paycheck barely any better off. That's an inherently fragile situation. So, of course, when you have something like the virus, stock market crash, companies saying, we don't think we're going to make as much this year as we thought, so we're going to revise our estimates downward, that crashes the stock price. We might have to lay people off. Then those employees without a job can't go out and buy things. It is a self-perpetuating feedback loop. Okay? So if this is the beginning of the global recession, maybe the virus is making it happening a year sooner than it otherwise would, or 2 years sooner, or whatever. The fundamental fragility of this economic system that we have, which is a less regulated form of capitalism than some of the northern European countries, is the way I would describe what we have in the United States. That has not changed. And it's always a matter of, well, when is the next pullback going to happen and what will trigger it, rather than have we really reorganized the economy to prevent this from happening at all? Have we, for example, used a higher marginal tax rate on the very rich to raise the standard of living for the greatest number of people, so that maybe instead of half the country being unable to afford an unexpected $400 expense, you reduce that to only 10% of the country is unable to afford an unexpected $500 expense. That strengthens the economy significantly. Rich people having more money in their bank account that they're not planning to spend anyway does not strengthen the economy at the broad level. That is one thing that is very quickly being exposed here. This doesn't minimize the virus, the reality of the virus. This doesn't minimize any of the other things, the oil prices, all of this other stuff. But that is what I think we should be focusing on, which is, if it is the start of the new global recession, it was merely a matter of time. And until the system is changed to be less fragile and to have fewer people living precariously on the edge of being able to afford their not extravagant lifestyles, we're always just
another year or two or few years from the exact same thing happening. It's a feature of the system, not a bug. And more economists seem to understand this.
Now that I'm banking with Chime, I get paid up to 2 days early with direct deposit.
You do?
Yeah.
Every debate, when it comes to Medicare for all, they always burn it out. Well, but it's $34 trillion. He doesn't even know the real number.
Yeah.
And it's like, I wish Bernie would go.
He doesn't know the real number that I just said out loud again.
Yeah, exactly.
I just said the number out loud. And you know what that number is? Smaller than what we actually pay now. So no matter which lens you look at it through, we can afford it many times over.
Ron, you're 100% right. How is it that Bernie Sanders cannot box Joe Biden's fucking ears in, and Joe Biden every debate is allowed to say, "We're gonna get to 30 trillion. You can't. You don't have a knockout punch for that stupid fucking thing he's saying. You don't have a knockout punch for that. You can't stop and turn to Joe and go, Joe, the reason why you don't understand where the money's coming from is because you're paid not to understand it. That's why people don't have health care. After 8 years of you had a Democrat-controlled House, a filibuster-proof Senate, and you had a Democrat in the House, and you gave us a right-wing health care plan anyway. That's what voting blue for no matter who does. You get right-wing policies anyway. The Democratic Party is a fucking zombie party. And Bernie is not going to fight for us. That's not happening. I mean, he won't fight for himself, put it that way. He's not fighting this guy. He's not. Chris Hedges was right. He doesn't have the intestinal fortitude to do this. He doesn't have the character necessary for this. He doesn't have it. He doesn't have it. He's gonna, as the cannibals are overrunning us, he's gonna be saying, "Can I get the door for you? Are you okay? Are you my friend?" It's maddening. I'm beyond. It's beyond.
He gave this speech yesterday about the coronavirus that was actually pretty inspired and sounded like a leader. And he's like, "This is a serious thing." And I'm watching this. I read that Jackie Salas wrote the speech Bernie should give. I saw Namiki Constant put a video like, "Bernie, you have to fight for us. You have to do something." I don't know, because we've all been wanting him to do this. He should have said all those things to Joe Biden and then go, "And now let's cut to some commercials from the healthcare lobby that pays these people to say this."
I mean, it's that you gotta be ballsy. If you want to do a revolution, motherfucker, if you think they're gonna let you take power, you gotta think they're not gonna give it to you. You gotta fucking take it from them. And how do you take it from them? You start calling them who they are, corrupt fucking enemies of the people, and you're here to fucking set things straight. And Joe Biden is not your goddamn friend. He's your fucking enemy because he's working against giving healthcare to people. What kind of a friend do you That's your friend? Your friend wants to deny healthcare to people? That's your friend. Well, you got fucking shitty friends who made it harder for people to get rid of their debt and bankruptcies? Motherfucker. It's beyond a bad strategy. You're hurting the country, Bernie. It's beyond bad strategy. You're validating that he's a fucking decent guy, that he's not a decent guy. He's what's wrong with this fucking country, and you know it. And Bernie knows that Joe Biden's what's wrong with this country, and Bernie will lie to the American public and say Joe Biden is a decent guy and that he can beat Trump. Bernie's lying to you when he says that. Joe Biden is not a decent guy. What kind of a fucking decent guy takes money from Wall Street and then makes it impossible for people in the most desperate situations to get rid of their debt through bankruptcy? What kind of a guy does that? A fucking corrupt piece of it. That's the kind of guy. An evil cog. A cog in an evil wheel. A willing cog in an evil wheel. That's who Joe Biden is. He's the fucking enemy of workers. He's the enemy of progressives. He's the enemy of fucking Americans. This guy's done everything to hurt America. Kicked people out of their houses, fucking propping up Wall Street. He's not decent. What Bernie needs to do now is tell people to get out of fucking yellow vest and start shutting shit. Well, they're shutting shit down now because of coronavirus. So now it's like you can't even shut shit down. You can't even shut shit down. They're not even. I bet they won't even have a fucking convention. They're going to have a convention online. So and now, if you look at it this way, protesting is now illegal because any group larger than 250 is illegal, and they could just come in and break it up. So there will. So this is work. So because of this situation, I mean, there's nothing. And if Bernie doesn't go in and try to land a couple, at least throw a knockout punch on Sunday. This is it. There's
Sunday's
nothing we can do. We can't even protest.
Sunday.
There won't even be a convention. There won't even be anything. Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say this is it, Sunday. So it's like this pandemic. He stepped up and made that speech yesterday. We just had to watch Trump give that ridiculous dumb speech today. This is it. Sunday, this is it. Because they've suspended primaries. So Bernie actually has an opportunity here on Sunday to go, I'm sorry, Joe, people are going to die if we don't have my
Medicare for all.
Medicare for all is
my God. Could there be a greater fucking time for him to make this case?
All the how are we going to pay for it, the I'm afraid of socialism, all those people who are terrified and just bought a pallet full of toilet paper, those people on Sunday night, because their kids can't go to school Monday, they can't go to work Monday, they've spent all weekend locked up, terrified, is this thing going to kill me? They're going to be watching. This is going to be the most watched primary debate. Everyone's home. This is it.
Yeah.
And if Bernie comes in and goes, my friend Joe Biden, let's work together, we know that he signed that agreement. We know it.
And if he's the nominee, I will work hard, and he will beat Trump.
And we're all going to die.
See, that actually, I think that's been the biggest punch in the gut. The biggest punch in the gut was not Joe Biden's my friend. We had to give the gold medal for, like, wow, big misstep. The biggest punch in the gut was Joe Biden can beat Trump. A, because it's not true.
Not true.
It's not true at all.
Bernie knows that, right, Ron?
I feel like he's got to, and he said that. And
so you know he's lying to you, right?
That's not true.
Bernie's lying.
Bernie's lying if he says Joe Biden can beat Trump.
Bernie's lying to win. He's lying. That's a fucking lie, and Bernie knows it.
It's this Sunday. This is it.
Yeah, this is it.
With these primaries suspended, this is Bernie's chance to go, you're all terrible. I'm actually the voice of reason. Trump is a jackass. He thinks Google's going to fix it. Biden can't even remember what day it is. I actually have a plan, and because everyone is looking for leadership, and there is none from fucking jackass Trump. There's nothing from Trump
or Pelosi,
Schumer, Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell didn't want to sign off on the stimulus plan, the Republican Senate, because it was going to have money for abortion. Really, we're going to fucking argue about abortion now? Like, what happens if there's not enough hospital beds? There's not enough respirators. This woman, I forget her name, like I think she's in charge of health and human safety, a Trump appointee, was on Fox, and the Fox News woman kept asking point blank, are there enough beds? Are there enough respirators? Because that's a problem they're having in Italy right now. And she goes, look, Trump, we've got a great plan. We're closing it. She wouldn't answer the question. They asked her 4 times point blank, and she wouldn't answer it because you know what? And then I was listening on NPR. The person came back and said, there's not enough. There's only 95,000 respirators in this whole country. What happens? We're a country of 330 million people. What happens if 1 million people all need to get tested in the matter of a couple of weeks?
They're not testing people. The top health official in Ohio said that he suspects there's 100,000 people infected in Ohio. So we are on the trajectory right now. We are where Italy was a week ago. Yeah. So in 1 week we will be where Italy is, and the whole goddamn country's going to be shut down. But I bet they won't because Wall Street owns it. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. Hey Siri, what's 350 million times a month?
Times 1,000 is 350 million.
So that's $350 billion a month. That would be right. For if you give $1,000 to everybody. So $1,000 to everybody would be $350 billion a month.
So for 5 months, the time it would probably take to quell this thing,
everybody gets a check.
There's the $1.5 trillion that these cocksuckers on Wall Street just fucking got.
There it is. There it is.
You fucking parasite pieces of shit.
There it is.
I'm sorry, I know your mother all this.
I know. I'm sorry. My mother-in-law stopped watching. Everybody, the next live Jimmy Dore show is May 1st in Minneapolis, and then we're going to Chicago. Go to jimmydoorecomedy.com for a link for all the tickets to all our live shows. And become a premium member at jimmydorecomedy.com/join. We give you hours of bonus material every week. Thanks for your support.
We're the different breed, aren't we?
Hi everyone, I'm Taylor Hudak. I am in London right now. We just wrapped up the Imperialism on Trial event. Today is Tuesday, and this is the second day of Julian Assange's full extradition hearing. Right now, I am joined by former MP and talk show host George Galloway. George, thank you so much for joining.
Pleasure.
So today obviously wrapped up the second day of his full extradition hearing. What is your take on what has happened so far in the courtroom?
Well, I've got no confidence in this lower court. The process has been wholly corrupted from the beginning, and the people presiding over it are riven with conflicts of interest, and they have no interest in the actual arguments being made. So I see it more as a rubber stamp court. But further up the tree, when this matter goes to appeal and then appeal, more senior judges who have to take more care about the law, I have some hope that we can win the argument about abuse of process and disproportionality. Julian is facing 175 years in prison if he goes back to a show trial in the United States on espionage charges, even though none of the alleged offences that he is said to have committed took place in the United States. He has no loyalty to the United States. He's not a citizen of the United States. He's never signed any document that he would keep secret anything in the United States. He's an Australian operating in London and elsewhere in Europe. He has absolutely no responsibility to harbour the secrets of the United States war machine. So disproportionality is an issue. But the abuse of process is so stark, so ugly, that it's difficult to see how more senior judges cannot give that due weight. And of course, the biggest corruption of process is the fact that his lawyer-client confidentiality was for years breached by secret CIA filming of every meeting he ever had with any of his lawyers to talk about extradition. Now, in any other court on any other day, this would already have been thrown out because of that corruption. If you were on trial for a litter offence, the case would be thrown out if it turned out that the prosecuting authority had access to your discussions with your lawyer.
Right, it seems that would be sufficient to throw this case out of court, which is telling me that this is certainly a selective prosecution and also a political persecution. And you made the point earlier tonight that under the U.S.-UK treaty, the UK cannot extradite a person to the United States.
The all-new 888 Casino is the hottest online casino experience. Have fun on PC, iOS, and Android from...
They're calling it a pandemic, but it's really more of a panic. The coronavirus panic, and it's going to be one for the history books. The New York Times is flying off the shelves as anxious readers want to get updates on the spread of the virus and its economic impact. President Trump addressed the nation on Wednesday night to explain some of the protective measures the government was taking and some countermeasures to minimize the economic downturn. But as you know, in the eyes of CNN, the coronavirus news network, the president can't do anything right.
At one point during this address, the president referred to the coronavirus as a, quote, foreign virus. Now, why the president would go as far as to describe it as a foreign virus is going to come across to a lot of Americans as smacking of xenophobia, to use that kind of term in this speech, Chris.
Well, look, sometimes we can answer the questions, and the answer is he's doing it to put blame somewhere else.
Well, guys, obviously you didn't learn about the 5 W's in journalism school. Who, what?
Donald Trump is banking on America's good economy to secure his re-election, but the global impact of the coronavirus on stock markets, supply chains, and the U.S. economy may put a kink in Trump's armor. Financial expert Max Wolf will join us now to lead off our discussion. He's managing partner of Multivariate. Okay, let's begin with the bad week with the stock market. Got better today. What do you make of the effect of the coronavirus on the stock market?
So certainly it was a tough week last week, and today was quite a bounce. I do think that Jerome Powell, under heavy pressure from consulting physician Donald J. Trump, has gotten into the virology business, and I don't think that's one that his credentialing or various weapons to use are terribly well suited to. And I think, unfortunately, although it's repairable, this has been a tough episode for the Fed, and it further suggests no patience and an overly solicitous relationship both with equity markets and with a sitting president.
What's your assessment of how ready companies in the United States are to deal with a pandemic?
Sure. So look, on some level, nobody is ready for a pandemic, and we all hope that we don't get tested and it doesn't get revealed in the most lethal and disruptive way possible. That being said, it's clear that the federal government spent a bunch of time on this, but they got into the business late and they have not put much effort or resource against it. And so we still have major newspapers, New York Times, Washington Post, etc., talking about, and two physicians who are begging for testing kits that they're not getting. And that's separate and apart from the fact that we know this is a recurable disease, so you can get it, get better, go out and get it again, and that we don't really have our arms around how fast and under what exact circumstances it can be communicated from one person to another. So it's a emerging threat, a meaningful one, and I think we've already seen the worst case scenario. If you look at things like the travel industry, hospitality industries, if you're in the hotel or airline business, this is already a 40% haircut in the market last week, although some bounce today, and a pretty scary event with an unknown end date.
And the political aspects of coronavirus. How do you assess that?
Well, that's probably even harder than the difficult economics, but I do think we've adopted both a political and economic world that assumes that we're somehow protected from the worst of things. So the Fed jumps in every time the market falls, no matter how overdue that reset of prices probably is. And I think the hope is that this will be cured either strangely by monetary policy or by someone else. The real test of a society, a government, an apparatus is always the response, not the disease or the disaster. I think of the most prepared countries have an earthquake and they have 10 deaths and they're all tragedies, and the least prepared countries have 10,000 deaths, right? And so how you respond is the big story here. And so far, I think you'd have to give the government, sitting government here, something like a C- in terms of the readiness and speed of engagement, but that can be made up for by future excellence, which I think we might be betting some of our prosperity and some of our lives on.
Amid fallout from the coronavirus, Trump has doubled down on his criticism of the Federal Reserve. He's demanding lower interest rates. What's your reaction to that?
It would be tragic to see that. First of all, there hasn't been a growth slowdown yet, particularly in the U.S. There's one likely. We can't do everything with monetary policy, and the Federal Reserve catered to a whim that had no basis in macroeconomic fact flow in December, and his stock market claims or anyone's re-election are not the reason to make monetary policy. If the Fed continues to do these things, it will lose the perception of independence. It will therefore be unable to reassure the market during those episodes when the Federal Reserve should and needs to intervene, and it will undermine the credibility of King Dollar, the U.S. dollar, which is a cornerstone of American prosperity and really has been since we took the global title from the United Kingdom in the period between World War I and World War II. So we are playing with real fire here, and this is a disturbing episode to witness, especially given that the macroeconomy in the U.S. so far is defined by ultra-low interest rates, and we haven't seen the macro disruption yet rise to the occasion outside of the equity market. And I'll remind everyone again that equity market price targeting is not the basis for rational monetary policy and has redistributive effects in the U.S. economy, which have led to a lot of turmoil and some pretty substantial extreme opinion in the American electorate.
Are you pessimistic about all this, Max?
Hard hard to be optimistic about Corona, but I do think it's solvable. I think these are unfortunately these crossroad moments in the evolution of an economy and a polity where you either step up and do the hard, brave, right thing that's caused some immediate pain, or you don't. And if you don't, it eventually catches up with you. And if not today, then probably not that far in the future. Got to remind people that the cornerstone of this bounce back we've seen is free money, ultra loose monetary policy, $1 trillion annual deficits, and upward wealth redistribution. And if you look at primary results or various debates in the Congress, the country's pretty polarized, they're pretty angry, and I don't know if it's the right time to add a bunch of stress to the situation.
Hey, Max, thanks for joining us. Always a pleasure talking with you.
Always my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
First up, teleporting here, he is a former Harvard instructor of risk communication and risk psychology and author of How Risky Is It Really? Can you guess why we booked him? David Ropey. Okay. Thank you so much. David, how are you?
I'm fine.
Yes, you are.
Excited that I'm not there so that I could not shake hands with you in person. But
you know what? I want to tell people you were perfectly fine with getting on the plane. We said, you know what? We've done satellite before. Maybe this is a good time to do it, to set an example. But tell me first about that. Like, you're the guy. This is why I wanted to have you on tonight, because the title of your book is so perfect. How risky is it? Getting on a plane, how risky is it?
the air doesn't transport this stuff, so it's just surfaces that you touch, and you touch them in the airport. So the flying out isn't any different than that. But we hear about, oh, people aren't flying, and that feeds our kind of emotional relationship to risk. It's a perfect example of what this whole conversation, I hope, will be about. You said perfectly in your monologue, quote you, we don't do smart stuff in this country. When there's a risk around, we don't do smart stuff. We don't use the prefrontal cortex, the reasoning part of our brain.
Don't touch your head.
Yeah, right. Wait. By the way, I've been introduced a lot of times, and this is the first time there was a reference to oral sex in the Oval Office in the introduction lead-in to me. Thank you. No. The serious point is, and coronavirus is a great teaching moment for this. We are hardwired to use our emotions more than reason all the time, but especially when it comes to keeping ourselves safe. So what happens is we get one or two or three quick facts, and we have to do this quick in case the threat is like right there, right? And then we run them through a lot of subconscious emotional filters. Our personal circumstances, are we healthy, are we old, our age, our gender, all those things, and a set of instincts that we all share that make some risks feel scarier and some risks feel less scarier. So imagine like a bunch of stained glass windows, right? So we're here, we have a few facts, we're looking through all this dark color, right? And from that, we're supposed to be objective on the other side with statistics and evidence. It's not how we do it. We end up, as a result, being more afraid than we need to, like now, or sometimes less afraid than we should be, like with influenza.
But Doc, the stained glass window is a bad analogy because a lot of people look at that and think that's the answer.
And they pray.
That's
for exactly. Hang a second. They pray. A lot of people suggest about religion for exactly this psychology. So one of the things that coronavirus is scary about is that it's new. Everybody says, yeah, it's new, it's scary. Why is that scary? New is a new cell phone. It's not scary. New is not knowing. And not knowing means we don't know what we need to know to protect ourselves.
And not seeing. Isn't that it? We don't know about it, and we can't quite see it.
And we can't quite control our own safety because we don't know how to keep ourselves safe. No. Talk about seeing. It's like driving down the road, if you can get going at any speed in Los Angeles, and your eyes are closed. That's scary, right? So we turn, in fact, to religion and many other things, masks, toilet paper, they're all the same. For a sense of control, when we don't have personal control, we look for it in other ways.
Wait, masks and toilet paper are the same?
Yeah, and sorry,
I'm glad I don't live with you,
and
Doc.
Islam, right, yeah, right. But you get it, right?
Whenever I hear about this kind of stuff, I always think of my little dog, Chico. because he loves to eat the end of my cereal in the bowl and when I put it down. But if I leave the spoon in the bowl, that is a risk he will not take. He loves that cereal, but he will not go near the bowl if there's a fucking spoon in it. Yet when I pull in the driveway, he runs right in front of the car.
2 words.
People and dogs are not good at assessing risk. That's your right?
Yeah. Well, dogs, I've had several dogs. They're awesome. They're great teachers about this because they're totally in the moment. They're taking their cues from absolutely only the evidence in front of them, not yesterday, not tomorrow, not all these characteristics that make risk feel
like
scary or less like control. Well, yeah.
Okay, so I the panic I feel is making things worse than the actual disease. What? I see you gesturing.
Yeah, that's absolutely spot on. 2 things. First of all, panic is when the zombies are attacking us or the wrong person gets elected, right? Panic is society run amok. We're not panicking when we buy toilet paper. It may look silly. We're not doing smart things like you said, but we're looking for a sense of control, and that's instinctive precaution. It doesn't match the facts. That's what I'm saying. This whole conversation is our fears are what we're going on, not just the evidence alone. But we're not panicking, But what we are doing when we overreact is sometimes we're creating other risks. So let me be very specific here. There are people who are more worried about this than they need to be, and that worry suppresses their immune system and makes them more vulnerable to getting the thing they're worried about.
Yep. Yeah. If you lose sleep, if you have stress, those are terrible factors for your immune system. Yeah.
Exactly.
The only analogy I could think about this time is when AIDS hit, which is not exactly analogous, but people were panicked. And I do remember a period when we didn't know much about it, and people thought, they were saying, maybe it could go airborne. And that made people freak out.
Exactly. It was the not knowing. You said it again. And the not knowing leaves us feeling like, I don't know how to protect myself. I was putting the mic on for this. I was telling the guy in the studio that when I was a reporter in Boston in the 80s, I worked for a union, and they wouldn't let me touch any of the gear until it was time to mic up an AIDS patient. And they were scared. So I did the miking up because I wasn't. When you don't know what you need to know to protect yourself, you're more afraid. But if I may, to broaden the conversation, that's only one of these several characteristics that make us more or less afraid. We're more afraid of man-made risks than natural risks. We're more afraid of risk that's now than later. That's climate change. That's why we're not as afraid as we should be of climate change, right? This language of risk perception psychology that I wrote about, that we're talking about, this is just one example.
So, I feel like our general posture as a nation has become one of fragile people. If we were a hardier people who weren't afraid of everything to begin with, kids can't walk to school on their own like they did when I was a kid. Kids cannot be left alone. That's a free-range child. That's verboten these days. I feel like we would be in a better place to handle this because we're already so anxious about stuff that we shouldn't be anxious about. Don't you think that's a part of it?
It is a part of it, and it's called in the scientific literature the social amplification of risk, which basically means that how we hear about things, which aren't always perfectly factual and accurate, and they go through our feelings, lead us to perceive that risk in ways where we do other things that are bad to us, like teaching our kids that it's a scary world. With drills in school that you're going to be shot, the statistical risk of which is infinitesimal. The messages that we're sending each other that crime is bad here and, oh my God, the sky is falling in every which way, like coronavirus is now, make no mistake, the risk is real and serious, and we should acknowledge that, feeds a general sense of what George Gerbner at the University of Pennsylvania, who passed away, used to call the mean world syndrome. If all we hear about is that the sky is falling, we walk around ducking.
What did he pass away from?
Being old.
Not important, Doc. Not important. Let me ask you one last question. I brought this up last week, and I hope it's somewhat true, which is that I feel like they being mean the authorities, so we don't know quite exactly who's doing the talking, but the information we get, tend to, when there's a crisis lurching, they tend to tell us it's going to be worse. so that when it's not as bad, we go, oh, good, that wasn't as bad. It's better to be pleasantly surprised. You know, the examples I gave were Y2K was going to be horrible at the turn of the century, and then there was the BP oil spill, which was going to be horrible, and the fires of Kuwait. Remember, after the Gulf War, Saddam Hussein lit all the oil wells on fire in Kuwait, and that was going to be years in the making, and it was 8 months before they put it out. Do you think that's the same thing here? They're telling us it's going to be worse so that when it's not as bad, we're pleasantly surprised?
It's part of it, but there are two sides of it. So let me start on the other side first and get back to your side. A lot of people in power don't like the fact that people are more afraid than they need to be and are what we call panicking, buying toilet paper, right? They try to control that with the don't panic message. God, how many times have we heard that from all the people at the very top? Well, you don't hear it from the reasonable people at the CDC. You don't hear it from the reasonable people at the WHO. Right. They understand the importance of respecting our feelings, not trying to control them and telling people, hey, you should feel like I want you to feel, which sounds like I want you to feel like that so you can go buy stocks and be happy and I won't take any grief for this. It's disrespectful to tell people how they feel. The Hell's people don't do that, but what they do is what you said. There's worse coming, and there is. That's a way to put things in perspective now when they get worse so they won't freak us out even more. Right. And this talk about this is like the normal flu, that's not comparing the two diseases. They're different. But it is a way of saying, let's put in perspective that we've lived through something like this before so it doesn't feel as new, which makes it feel scary.
Okay, thank you. You put a lot in perspective. I appreciate that. Stop touching your head. Thank you, David. And let's meet our panel.
Senator Bernie Sanders. Around the corner somewhere is Jane Sanders. We are live from Burlington for our inaugural fireside chat. Senator, there's a great debate online about whether this is a furnace or a stove. What is this?
Why are you asking me a hard question? It's an old stove. And root is amazingly efficient. It really warms up the whole house. And right now, spring is coming to Vermont, but it's still nippy out there, so it's nice to have the weather.
It feels toasty. Everybody, thank you all for all your efforts out there. We are working hard for this nomination. We're a little bit behind in the delegate count, but we are every day working to catch up. And today, actually, in fact, we won Northern Mariana Islands. Thank you to the team out there. Soon, there will be votes on Tuesday, we expect, pending public health officials. We're going to have some votes in Arizona, Illinois, Ohio, Illinois, Arizona, and Florida. And so for those of you who live in those states, we'd ask you to wash your hands. If you're feeling healthy, wash your hands, go vote, and wash your hands again. We'll need you. So thank you for everything you're doing. We also have a debate coming up tomorrow night, which we'll talk about in a moment. But before we get to those issues, I just wanted to talk about the coronavirus outbreak. It's obviously been on the top of all our minds, top of your mind. Senator has spoken about it almost every single day over the past few days. We're going to talk about that in a moment. It has affected our campaign. We have moved to a completely remote operation. We don't have offices because we've deemed them to be a public health risk for our own staff. We're heeding the public health experts on this, so we've moved away from field offices and headquarter offices, and everyone's working remotely. But this campaign, more so than any campaign potentially in presidential history, is best suited and prepared for this kind of a campaign. We have architected ourselves with strength in our digital organizing capacities, and obviously through social media and our live streaming capacities here. We are going to flex every muscle we've got on this campaign to make sure that we are communicating with voters on a frequent basis, and we're going to be innovating. In fact, I think Monday night we'll be doing hopefully a rally with some bands and providing entertainment to make sure people are engaged as they are sitting at home thinking about not spreading the coronavirus. Senator, that's the way I'll tee it up for you, Senator, is that you had some remarks the other day that struck all of us, which is that we're in this period of social distancing, that they call social isolation, and people are sitting apart, and yet more so than ever before, this pandemic has reminded us that we're all in it together. And I wonder if you'd reflect on how this has caused you and our campaign to think about the policy issues that affect this nation.
Thanks very much, Baz. we are in an unprecedented moment in American and world history. I have never seen anything like this in my life, nor has anybody else out there. And it seems to me that what we have got to focus on now is how we deal with the short-term crises that we're facing, which are very, very severe. What we learn from these crises in order to prepare ourselves for the future, in terms of understanding how we got here, where we want to go differently in terms of at least healthcare and the economy. I think what is clear right now is that despite the fact we are spending twice as much per capita on healthcare as the people of any other nation, it is astounding how unprepared we are as a nation to deal with this crisis. And obviously this deals with Trump and the pathetic nature of his administration. But it does go beyond that. The idea right now that we do not have a
again, being older than dirt, and remembering 1968, and remembering that Gene McCarthy's supporters did not support Hubert Humphrey and Richard Nixon won, I see a parallel. Are you worried that Bernie Sanders supporters are not going to support Joe Biden?
Well, that's why it's so important for us to remember what is at stake here. Saying I'm not going to vote for Joe Biden is saying you're not going to vote for higher minimum wage. It's saying you're not going to vote for an expansion of healthcare in this country. It's saying you're not going to vote for real action on climate change. Look, I get that we each are passionately committed to our candidate. I was passionately committed to me being the nominee until I saw that it was time to step aside. But the distance between us, between even the most different of the Democratic contenders and the president we have right now, who, by the way, right now is responsible for keeping the American people safe, and it's not happening. This is literally life or death, and we've got to come to the moment where we put all this behind us and come together.
So, and I know you say that, but you've heard people expressing disappointment, expressing, just being torn apart that it appears Bernie Sanders is not going to drop out of this thing eventually.
Well, my hope is that the debate will be one that really focuses on issues, and in the course of debating different approaches, reminds us that actually we're the ones who care about this. Remember, there's not a competition between the Republican plan on climate change and the Democratic plan on climate change. Because Republicans don't have a plan. All it is us Democrats talking about whether we do it this way or whether we do it that way.
But by not having a plan, they're united. By Democrats having multiple plans, they're divided. So in a way, it's easier for Republicans to message because Democrats are in conflict.
Well, and we got to be smart about this. Remember, the Trump people will be doing everything in their power to exploit those divisions. We may have hostile foreign powers doing everything in their power to exploit those divisions among those of us Americans who actually care about this stuff.
The newest slots come to GoldenNuggetCasino.com first, like Bonanza and its Mega Ways with free spins, unlimited multiple.
Since they got elected, members of the Squad, the far-left progressive Democrats, have been accused of illegal activities, campaign finance violations, or other unethical acts. Recently, in a story from ProPublica, they talk about how Rashida Tlaib is stonewalling the Office for Congressional Ethics while they're investigating potential ethics violations. We have a story from last year about how Ocasio-Cortez may have illegally paid her boyfriend so he could move to New York to be with her, which brings me to today's story. In a shocking twist, Ilhan Omar has just come out and admitted a relationship with a man she was accused of illegally funneling money to. Now, that story between her and this guy is extremely complicated. There's, the guy's wife coming out saying that he declared her love for Ilhan. Ilhan was accused of paying off her husband a large sum of money so he would stay quiet, denying the whole thing. And this plays into the ongoing scandal around Ilhan Omar's past campaign finance violations, but also whether or not she actually married her brother. This is just getting so strange. that we actually have another big story about the far left Democrats, and to me, it is kind of shocking to see that these progressives would absolutely excuse this overt corruption if it meant getting rid of the Democratic establishment. Because for me, I wouldn't want to replace crony establishment elites with corrupt individuals who would probably do the exact same things. I mean, what Ilhan Omar is doing seems overt and obvious. In fact, she just comes out and posts a photo on Instagram saying, yup, we're married, after previously denying there was a relationship at all, lending credence to the idea that she was paying this guy through her campaign so he could travel around with her because they were having an affair. Now, the FBI is apparently looking into claims she married her brother. We'll see how far it goes, but this is just getting crazy. Let's get started with the latest news. Ilhan Omar announces marriage to Tim Mynett in Instagram post. Now, for most of you who've seen that headline, you'd probably be like, so what? Congratulations on getting married. This is the guy who divorced his wife. His wife claims that he was having an affair. This is the guy that Ilhan Omar was accused of illegally funneling money to. She denied the affair, and if there was no affair, there's no real motive for paying for this guy to travel around with her other than work. But if it's as it turns out, they were legit in a relationship, which shows that it may actually be probable, nay likely, that she was paying this guy to romp around with her. Let's read the story. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com/donate if you'd like to support my work. There are several ways you can give. However, the best thing you can do is just share this video. YouTube suppresses content like this. There's actually a lot of things I can't talk about right now, showing you that, well, censorship is a big problem on YouTube. But if you do think these videos are good, please consider sharing them. But more importantly, many of you have not subscribed. And if you want to make sure you get these videos every day, because I post them every day at 4 p.m., subscribe, hit the notification bell. Otherwise, it may come to a point where YouTube just stops showing these videos. Well, let's read the first story from Fox News. Rep. Ilhan Omar shared some personal news Wednesday night. She's a new bride. Well, in that regard, congratulations. The Minnesota Democrat posted on Instagram a photo of herself and her former political consultant, Tim Mynett. Got married. From partners in politics to life partners. So blessed. Alhamdulillah, she wrote in the caption, ending with the Arabic word that translates in English to praise be to God. Word of a romance between Omar and Mynett became more than just talk last August, when Mynett's then-wife, Beth Mynett, filed for divorce from her 38-year-old husband. In her court papers, Beth Mynett claimed her husband's traveling and work hours may have been more related to his affair with Omar than to his actual work commitments. The Mynett split was finalized in December. Beth and Tim Mynett are parents of a teenage son. Last October, Omar filed for divorce from her husband, Ahmed Hersi, the father of their 3 children. There has been an irretrievable breakdown of the marriage relationship, Omar claimed in court documents filed on her 30th birthday. Omar claimed neither partner was seeking an order of protection, and she asked the court to grant them joint legal and physical custody of their 3 minor children. The Omar-Hersi divorce was finalized in November, according to the reports. Hersi then found a new girlfriend and remarried just 37 days later in Somalia, the New York Post reported. Hersi posted a photo of himself and a woman believed to be his new wife on Instagram in January. Quote, I look forward to this new chapter in my life, and I ask all of you to join me in celebration, he captioned the photo. But over on Ilhan Omar's Instagram, interestingly, there are many people cheering her on and saying congratulations. And, look, if the story was just her getting married and finding happiness, I got no issue with that. Congratulations on finding someone you truly care about, and they look like they're very happy. The problem is campaign finance violation. Back in August, Ilhan Omar was hit with an FEC complaint accused of paying alleged paramour's travel expenses with campaign funds. As we now know, it's not an allegation that it's her paramour. They got married. She wanted to marry the guy. She really had no choice but to come out and say she did. But it's kind of shocking to me because now it lends credence to the idea that you wanted this guy to be flying around the country or whatever with you, so you were paying him to do so, and it had nothing to do with campaigns. You cannot use campaign money for personal use. This is excellent evidence and circumstantial that she was doing just that. Let's read the story from Fox News. They say, the conservative Virginia-based National Legal and Policy Center filed a complaint against Rep. Ilhan Omar from Minnesota with the Federal Election Committee on Wednesday, alleging that the lawmaker used campaign funds to illegally reimburse her purported paramour for personal travel expenses. That's what the guy's wife was saying. Come on, man. Are we going to get an investigation into this? The guy's wife said he wasn't traveling for work. He was having an affair. This organization filed a complaint saying.
So if you get a tough question, just say, that's standard. Everyone pays it. Next. Carvana lets customers pick up their cars from one of their giant car vending machines.
So gimmicky.
Who's falling for this?
Millennials, they love experiences.
Yeah, people who don't like to be hassled.
That's boomers.
Zoomers, they were born online.
Influencers.
No, you already said millennials. So
Yeah.
Who else?
That about covers it. That's everybody.
Still, these car vending machines, big swing and a miss.
It's embarrassing.
Waiting for Indian banking hours to open? Use Zoom and wait no more. Introducing 24/7 high-value deposits to India. Send high-value transfers to most major banks anytime, typically within just 2 hours. No one gets your bank deposits to India faster than Zoom.
She was paying him because they were having an affair. Come on, man. That's enough, right? Start an investigation, dig into this. The complaint also charges that Omar failed to itemize travel reimbursements as required by the FEC Act, the Federal Election Campaign Act of 1971, and that the travel expenses increased during the same month that Omar's alleged affair with married Washington, D.C. political consultant Tim Minette heated up. Come on. She's just come out and admitted the relationship. When the affair allegedly started, she began giving him more money. How obvious. The complaint was filed one day after it emerged that Beth Minette, 55, submitted divorce papers in Washington, D.C. Superior Court, claiming her. It's starting to look like Bernie Sanders' far-left revolution has failed. He is tanking in the polls. Joe Biden is now skyrocketing the polls, and the 538 prediction model has Joe Biden with a 94% chance to win the Democratic nomination. Now, take it all with a grain of salt, because polls can and have been wrong, and prediction models, I don't even know what they're worth because they flip back and forth all day and night. But Bernie Sanders, for a brief period, was the front runner, and the progressives thought they were going to win. You can actually see the gradual meltdown in the faces of some progressive pundits as they start to realize they're losing. Which brings me to why they keep losing. In an op-ed today for the New York Times, one of the arguments put forward is that they are stuck in a bubble. They have crafted a narrative with misleading questions and polls to fluff themselves up, to make it seem like they're doing better than they really are. And you can see this when you look at the meltdown of the Young Turks. On Super Tuesday, they were convinced. Cenk Uygur said, this is it, we're going to win. I'm so excited. Convincing himself they were going to win. And as the day went on and Joe Biden started to win, the shock was visible. In fact, at one point, the Young Turks host was nearly in tears. At least to me, it seemed like he was about to cry. What we're seeing now from progressives is claims that the Super Tuesday primary was rigged. And I don't mean rigged in the sense the DNC uses their crony establishment connections to prop up their friends and push down those they don't like. I'm talking about they're actually arguing the exit polls don't match the hard votes. This can't be right. How is this possible? Well, it's possible that Bernie Sanders is a 78-year-old socialist who just had a heart attack and Americans don't want socialism. It's also possible that Bernie Sanders is so far left that even the Scandinavian countries he's praised as an example of what he wants have rejected him. Not kidding. Denmark in the past has said, no, Bernie, we're not socialists, we're social democracies. And recently, the ruling party of Sweden said that Bernie Sanders was far left, and at an event, there were no regular people. Because Bernie Sanders is trapped in bubble world, along with the rest of these far-left activists. When we look at voter enthusiasm, a poll shows that older people are favoring Joe Biden. They're excited. But younger people are upset by Biden, and they want Bernie Sanders. The problem is young people don't vote. Young people don't work, and young people aren't running the economy for the most part. It's working-class middle Americans who are doing this, and guess what? Turns out they don't want socialism. Now, if you were to ask me, I'm shocked to see they're going for Biden when you've got Tulsi. But, man, they really hate Tulsi Gabbard. Fine. I know there were a bunch of other Democrats that were still running. But to choose of these two people, to me, is just downright shocking. I do not see how Donald Trump loses in November. But the Democrats have spoken. It looks like everyone's saying Joe Biden. Joe Biden dominated on Super Tuesday, and going into Michigan, this big and very important state, Joe Biden is leading Bernie Sanders by like double digits, substantially, like 20+%, or in some polls around 16%. But it's huge. Bernie Sanders is just out. And instead of talking about why they failed, they keep themselves trapped in this echo chamber where all they can do is cry foul and scream, it was rigged against us. The system is rigged against us. Now, I'll stop. I'll be fair. I do think the DNC plays dirty games. They let Bloomberg in the debate. They changed the rules to make it easier for the guy, and then changed the rules to make it harder for Tulsi. Yeah, I absolutely think they're playing games. But with Bernie, it's something different. The polls are swinging against him. The voters didn't turn out. Okay, look, I like Tulsi, but I know she's not going to win. I'm a realist. I'm not going to pretend like the whole thing is rigged. To a certain extent, I want to separate. Let me make sure I separate this language. I mean rigged in the sense that a guy actually went and stole a box of ballots and ran off with it and switched it and stuffed the ballot. I know the establishment plays dirty games. That's a fair assessment. But to act like the hard numbers are being changed is just absurd. These people have trapped themselves in an echo chamber where they were convinced they were going to win, and it led to their downfall. Because when even the Scandinavian countries say you are too far left, if you don't listen, then you're going to lose. Because even the far left countries think you've gone too far left. So let's break down exactly what's going on. We'll take a look at some polls and see why it is that these progressives and many Democrats in general just cannot accept why they are going to lose. Let me make one more point. People look at my content, particularly on this channel, and they say, look at all the things Tim is saying about Trump. It's all good for Trump. He's defending the president. Nope. Now, I think I'm biased, for sure. A lot of people say I'm objective, whatever. You can call me whatever you want. But I'm telling you what I see as I see it. And I see a Democratic Party that is completely out of touch and fractured. And I see Donald Trump with a record high approval rating in the past month, with a record economy, save certain issues. The market was going pretty wild. Oil prices were dropping. There's a lot of uncertainty moving forward, but unemployment is way down, and things seem to be going pretty well for Trump for the most part. We'll see how things play out in the next coming weeks, but these are all facts. All right, and with record turnout from the GOP on Super Tuesday when they didn't need to vote for him, to ignore that is to fail. So they'll look at me and say, Tim's biased, he's conservative, all that stuff. And I'm like, I'm just looking at the numbers, and the president is mustering that support. This is exactly why they lose. Let's check this out. Here's a story from Vox. The problem with saying the Democratic primary is rigged. An expert on actual election rigging debunks the conspiracy theory. Now, before we move on, make sure you go to timcast.com/donate if you'd like to support my work. There's several ways you can give, but the best thing you can do is share this video. YouTube. The other day, I did a video on Trump's voter turnout, and they flagged it, and I can't even tell you what they flagged it as because even saying it would probably result in this video getting flagged again. It was an accident, they said. But in reality, it seems like YouTube, well, here's the facts. They're actively suppressing my content.
When it came to my weight, I was told to eat less and just move more.
But the weight always came back. That's because it's not just about my willpower. There's a science to obesity.
That's why my healthcare provider added Saxenda to my weight loss plan. It helps me eat fewer calories by working like one of my body's appetite hormones so I can lose weight and keep it off.
Saxenda is not for the treatment of type 2 diabetes and should not be used with other GLP-1 receptor agonist medicines or with insulin. Saxenda should not be used during pregnancy. Do not share needles or pens. Don't reuse needles. Do not take Saxenda if you have a personal or family history of medullary thyroid cancer, multiple endocrine neoplasia syndrome type 2, or if you are allergic to Saxenda. Stop taking Saxenda and get medical help right away if you get a lump or swelling in your neck, severe stomach pain, itching, rash, trouble breathing, or swelling of your face or throat. Serious side effects may happen, including pancreatitis. Gallbladder problems may occur. Taking Saxenda with medications to treat type 2 diabetes may cause low blood sugar. Tell your healthcare provider if you feel your heart racing while at rest. Depression or thoughts of suicide may occur. Call your healthcare provider right away if you have any mental changes. Common side effects are nausea, diarrhea, constipation, headache, vomiting, low blood sugar, decreased appetite, upset stomach, tiredness, dizziness, stomach pain, and changes in lipase levels. Some side effects can lead to dehydration, which may cause kidney problems.
You've always had the will.
Now adding Saxenda helps give us another way.
Tell your healthcare provider about your efforts to lose weight and keep it off, and ask about adding FDA-approved Saxenda.
This is Chime,
a mobile bank account, and debit card with no hidden fees, no overdraft or monthly maintenance fees. And I can even get my paycheck up to 2 days early with direct deposit. Start banking with Chime today at Chime.com.
And to a certain degree, I've got to be careful about how I frame this, but they've, hurt channels like mine and others have been hurt in the algorithm. We're no longer getting recommended, not to new subscribers at least, and they've made it much more difficult. We've also deal with false flagging and things like that, which suppress video viewership and such. So if you want to help me overcome that, sharing this video really does help. But also, don't forget, a lot of you haven't subscribed, and if you want to make sure you get my content in the future, hit the subscribe button below, hit the notification bell. That way you'll at least sometimes get an email when my videos go live. I don't want to read this story from Vox too much because you get the gist of it. Let me just read a little bit. They say, in the last couple of weeks, people from President Donald Trump to supporters of Bernie Sanders to top Republican operatives have begun to loudly proclaim the Democratic presidential primary is being rigged against Sanders in favor of former Vice President Joe Biden. Now, before I move on, I want to say I agree it's rigged in the sense the establishment will change the rules to benefit Biden. They'll, use their crony connections to push out Sanders, who is not a Democrat. But I'm specifically calling out vote manipulation, like literally changing votes. Let's read. The conspiracy theory is that establishment members of the Democratic National Committee and liberal media elites are so terrified that Democratic voters might elect Sanders, a Democratic socialist, to be the party's nominee, that they're actively conspiring to ensure that doesn't happen. Importantly, the Sanders campaign itself doesn't make this case, but it's an increasingly popular narrative. Hashtags like rigged DNC and rigged primary were even trending on Twitter last week. But experts who've studied actual rigged elections in places like Russia say the notion that the Democratic primary is being rigged is completely bogus, and they warn that perpetuating this narrative could deeply harm the legitimacy of the election and faith in U.S. democracy itself. Now I want to qualify what I've been saying. I think it's fair to say they've been playing games. If you want to call it rigged, Vox is wrong. It's just, I think you're being hyperbolic. I've done that too. I think that's fair. However, there are a lot of people who are adamant that Bernie Sanders is only losing because the system is rigged against him, because the establishment is playing dirty games. I am not necessarily of either opinion that Bernie is a socialist Americans reject or that the DNC is rigged. The reality is both are true. Americans overwhelmingly do not want to see their taxes go up for whatever Bernie wants to do and see private health care abolished. Well, depending on what you read, but it seems to be the case. It's also true that the DNC is trying to keep Bernie out. They're both true, but to what degree each plays a role, I can't tell you. But what ends up happening is you get progressives who are absolutely entrenched in the belief that Americans want socialism. They say things like, we are truly a progressive nation, and they espouse polls and numbers that frame it in their favor instead of looking at reality. Gallup, for instance, says America is center-right. That's true, by most anecdotes and by the data. Now, when you look at individual polls, you can probably start to create a narrative to convince yourself Americans want far-left policy. But let me tell you something. Even if that were the case, when Scandinavian countries say y'all are too far left, Bernie, then perhaps the problem isn't that Americans are progressive, it's that you have gone off the deep end. I want to show you now a real hard example of what's actually happening. Michigan Democratic primary poll. Biden is at 51% and Sanders is at 27%. I'm sorry. You are just not popular. Okay, I shouldn't say it that way. Bernie's absolutely popular. But you are not what the Democratic voters, most Americans, want. You have convinced yourself that your revolution is what Americans are after. You use polls to selectively prop yourselves up, and I have talked about this problem over and over again. Keeping in mind, I do use individual polls myself. I try to point out polls can be wrong and have been wrong. And when it comes to approval ratings, I use aggregate polling, which can still be wrong, but at least is much better than individual polls. And I have seen so many progressives, they wait until static appears and then say, aha, that proves it. Static in polling operates as such. If an organization produces 10 polls that all say Bernie Sanders is unpopular, all of a sudden there's one poll that says Bernie Sanders is very popular. Progressives like to grab that one poll and say, there it is. Bernie Sanders is polling so high that proves it while ignoring the rest of the polls. That's called noise. Sometimes blips occur. The same is true for Donald Trump's approval rating. There are some stories, some outlets that have said, boom, Donald Trump's approval rating higher than ever. I don't necessarily like to use that. I like to use the aggregate. There's also been polls that they say his disapproval higher than ever. And what have I seen? Progressives will latch onto disapproval higher than ever to claim Trump is in the worst shape he's ever been in. But when you compare it to 10 other polls, it's just noise. You don't need to ignore it, but you factor it into all of the other polls. It's why it's important, which brings me now away from Michigan to aggregate national polling. I'm sorry, Americans in the Democratic Party just do not want a socialist. Now, it is fair to say there is a civil war in the Democratic Party. You have 35% of people wanting Bernie and 50.3% wanting Biden. I'm surprised to see this because Bernie was the front runner for a brief period, but Joe Biden was polling in the lead for quite some time. And this shows me, well, one thing I've stated many times is that the Democratic voters seem not to have any principles because they'll vote for whoever they think is going to win. But it could just be that people don't care about policy, which I think is fair to a certain extent, or it could be that most Americans were maintaining their support for Biden at least 17% because they don't want socialists, or they don't want socialism. Take a look at the Culinary Union in Vegas. Now, it seems like for the most part that many of these union workers defied leadership and ended up voting for Bernie Sanders, but they said they didn't want to lose their private health insurance. However you want to weigh that is up to you. Leadership said it's bad. Many union voters still went out and voted for Bernie. So whether or not Medicare for All is something America truly wants, you're going to find polls across the board saying one thing or the other. All I can really tell you is that in the end, it is, to an extent, a rejection of socialism, but it also is, to an extent, the Democratic establishment propping up the person they want, but it comes down to the Democratic voters. The voters themselves are just saying they want Joe Biden, and now we can see who will win the 2020 Democratic primary, Joe Biden at 94%. I want to show you why I think they lose, and it's part of this op-ed, which I found really interesting from the New York Times. The simple reason the left won't stop losing. Progressives need to care more about winning. I'm sorry, this is from yesterday. I said it was from today. It's from yesterday. It's fascinating. He makes a really interesting point, and I got to read you a tidbit of this. How did the political left squander the opportunity that was the 2020 primary campaign? The Trump presidency has created tremendous energy among progressives. More than half of the Democratic voters now identify as liberal. Most favor Medicare for all. A growing number are unhappy with American capitalism. This year's campaign offered the prospect of transformational change, with a Democratic nominee who was more liberal than any in more than half a century. Instead, the nominee now seems likely to be a moderate white grandfather who first ran for president more than 30 years ago and whose campaign promises a return to normalcy. True, Bernie Sanders can make a comeback, but it would need to be a big one. Among people who voted on Super Tuesday itself, rather than voting early, before Joe Biden won South Carolina, Biden trounced Sanders. The race would have to change fundamentally for Sanders to win. If he doesn't, the obvious questions for progressives is what went wrong and how they can do better in the future. I think there are some clear answers, empirical answers that anybody, regardless of ideology, should be able to see. I'd encourage the next generation of progressive leaders to think about these issues with an open mind. The biggest lesson is simply this. The American left doesn't care enough about winning. Well, to an extent, I disagree, because I've said repeatedly that the polls show they only want to nominate who they think will win. But let's read. He says, it's an old problem, one that has long undermined left-wing movements in this country. They have often prioritized purity over victory. They wouldn't necessarily put it in these terms, but they have chosen to lose on their terms rather than win with compromise. Let me break down what I think he's saying. He's saying something different to what I just said. The progressives, the purity test. You must be perfect, period. You can never back down. There is no compromise. And if that's the case, you're going to lose because you got to compromise with the swing voters. He says, let me jump down. Progressive activists are right about public opinion on some of these issues. Most Americans do favor higher taxes on the rich, legalization of marijuana, additional gun control. But too many progressives aren't doing an honest analysis of the politics. They are instead committing what the journalist Matthew Iglesias has called the pundit fallacy. They are conflating their own opinions with smart political advice. They are choosing to believe what they want to believe. And that could not be a truer statement at all. It's exactly what I've seen. When I make a video
Donald Trump, record GOP voter turnout in incumbent primary season. Donald Trump, record town hall ratings. They say, Tim, why are you defending Trump? I'm not. I'm simply telling you what's happening. And if you reject the facts on the successes of Donald Trump, you will lose. When I said impeachment would fail, don't do it, they lost. I said over and over again, the scandals are bad. You need to break away and talk about kitchen table issues, and they refused, and they lost. It's not just the progressives. It's the Democrats for the most part in general. They just see what they want to see. This is their grand plan. Scandal, impeachment, and it was so obvious that it wouldn't work. When I say you need to become more moderate, they say, no, we don't, more progressive. And then guess what? The progressive wing didn't show up to vote. Bernie Sanders ended up capturing just regular Democratic voters who were enthusiastic about him. That's it. The youth voter, they went after that too, did not work. Kitchen table issues that young people don't care about. And you pandered on identity, and I said don't do it. And what happened? Elizabeth Warren got slammed, and she dropped out and lost because she started pandering on identity. And this was exposed by by Project Veritas when her own staff members were saying they were tired of it. But they didn't listen. They only see what they want to see. So for me, I can call it out, and they'll say, nope, Tim's only saying this because he must be right-wing, instead of realizing the facts are not on your side. That's why Donald Trump won in 2016. They could not see out of their bubble. You want to see a really bubble-breaking story? Check this out. From The Week, a left-wing publication. Democratic Socialist Bernie Sanders is too far left for Sweden's ruling Social Democrats, official said. Sweden! Of all places! A Swedish official for the Social Democrats has said Bernie Sanders is too far left. If that is not a wake-up call, I do not know what is. And I'll give you a hard example of what they're talking about. Now, for one thing, they first say that, let me show you a quote. We were at a Sanders event, and it was like being at a left party meeting, he told Sweden's Svenska Dagbladet newspaper, according to one translation. It was a mixture of very young people and old Marxists who think they were right all along. There were no ordinary people there simply, but they're convinced that Bernie Sanders is a centrist. I'm not exaggerating. This is the bubble they're trapped in. There was a meme going around among Bernie supporters showing Bernie as a centrist. Are you nuts? Even Sweden says he's too far left. Far left Sweden says Bernie is too far left. Yet the activists in America insist that he is a centrist. Joe Biden is actually conservative. They have lost the plot. I'll give you a hard example. From the debate, Pete Buttigieg said, quote, what is a radical idea? Is completely eliminating all private insurance, and part of how you know it is that no industrialized country has gone that far. Buttigieg said he used Denmark to illustrate his point, saying that even they have not abolished the possibility of private insurance. In fact, in many of these countries that have a national health service, you have your base level care, and then you have private insurance for more serious ailments. Something I've actually said is probably a good idea. Think about it this way. Let's say you break your hand. Well, getting a stint and your hand, properly set and everything, the bone set, most doctors can do that if they have the time. In fact, there's probably some, paramedics who can probably set that up for you. Now, that's not that difficult to do. You go in, they say, we're going to patch you up. Let's say you need stitches. We can patch you up. But let's say you have a more serious ailment that requires a very expensive treatment. That's where things become difficult. Now, in many of these countries, they go one step further. They will cover all the cost of even more difficult to cure ailments. I don't go that far. The point is, Bernie Sanders and some of the other candidates said outright no private insurance, just Medicare for all. When even Denmark doesn't do that, and Bernie has said he wants to be like Denmark, it's no surprise then that Sweden's a social democrat from Sweden, that's the left-wing party in Sweden, mind you, said Bernie is too far left. This is what we end up seeing in every circumstance. Labor civil war over Medicare for all threatens its 2020 clout. In union-heavy primary states like California, New York, and Michigan, the fight over single-payer healthcare is fracturing organized labor because many union members and much of the union leadership is in favor of you choosing what healthcare you want. Now, I certainly think it would be great if we guaranteed coverage for everybody, But getting rid of competition in the healthcare marketplace will only lead to more problems. I don't know how you solve these problems. I think it's a great ideal. But is it truly possible? Probably not. And I think what I've typically said is, it makes sense. A public option, some base level care, perhaps, and then you get supplemental health insurance that guarantees that everyone gets access to simple care. Like if you need stitches or to fix a broken, like to set a broken bone and get like a small cast or something. Don't ask me though. I'm not the expert. All I can really do is tell you that what they've proposed is not wildly popular on the left. It's popular with the activists who live in a bubble and just see what they want to see. You can see it exactly in Cenk Uygur on the Young Turks melting down. Look, I'm not trying to be mean to the guy. I want to make sure I make this clear every time. But he was nearly in tears when Bernie Sanders lost on Super Tuesday. He got 4th place in a moderate district in California, CA25. He ran. He got 4th place, 5% of the vote. Not only did he not even crack the top 3, he's famous. You'd think with all of his money and his wealth and the people who follow him, that would have gotten him something. But no, Twitter is not real life. The internet is not an example of your home district. What these people online don't realize, the Twitterati, the far left, and the Democrats who chase after them, is that what they're seeing is, I'll put it this way, imagine if every city in this country had 10 people, had 10 people who are progressive. When they all follow you, you think that you've got the majority support because look how many followers you have, hundreds of thousands, if not millions. But when it comes to actually voting in that district, it's dominated by moderate voices. They have tricked themselves into thinking this is what America wants, and then you see Kirsten Gillibrand, Elizabeth Warren pander to the identity crowd and fail miserably. And then Bernie Sanders refrains a little bit, but goes for the socialist message. It gets him a little far because, there are people who support more progressive values. That's true. But in the end, Biden wins. They have tricked themselves into believing things that aren't real because instead of assessing reality, they are just patting themselves in the back saying, we're winning, we're winning. They don't want to see the facts. They don't like looking at my videos where I talk about the Democrats spiraling out of control, the Civil War tearing them apart, or Trump winning. They don't want to hear it. They say, Tim's just framing it to benefit the conservatives. No, you know what, man? I've called out Trump on a lot of different things. The fact remains right now, he is doing really, really well. We'll see what happens in the coming weeks, the economy. But so far, he's been doing well. And the Democrats have been doing everything wrong. Impeachment failed. The scandals, all the scandals, none of it worked. They didn't campaign on kitchen table issues, and now they're risking losing their House majority. And that's what they get. I have only told you what I see is really happening. And it turns out, at least to a certain degree, I've been right. Bernie Sanders appears to be failing. Now, I will give you a caveat. It is entirely possible. 5:30, it flips around again. The polls were wrong about Biden in some states. What do I really know? I honestly can't tell you. I can tell you that I've been right on some things, and they don't want to hear it. But I really do think that Biden's going to get out of the check. That's where we're headed. And that's surprising to me because I was wrong in the past about this. This is the reality for me. When I look at the current data, I will give you my opinion. And that will change as the data changes. I thought Biden was out. I was like, there's no way this guy's the front runner. I was absolutely wrong. But I'm not rooting for or against Biden, Bernie, or Trump. That's the big issue here. The people who want Bernie to win will just say good things about him. In fact, there was a really funny post. Some journalists